Warm greetings to you all. When I began writing the Curse of the Werewolf series, Ragnar the White Wolf never existed. However, when Victor the Grey Werewolf, the main character, fought the Hellhounds in the woods of Redwater, I needed him to lose. I wanted him to lose, but I also needed a character to save him. Thus, Ragnar Liefsson the White Wolf was written. A werewolf bigger, scarier, with more experience and a reputation that preceded himself. I wanted my audience to see how a character so big and strong was still able to fall. How a brave warrior-knight-turned-werewolf was still able to feel pain and sorrow just like we do. Though, I also wanted this character to show my audience that even in their darkest of moments, unable to see the light at the end of the tunnel, there's always purpose in picking yourself up and trying again. Therefore, in this compilation video of the entire Werewolf and Reaper series, it was only fitting to begin with Ragnar's origin story. Now, most of you have raised concerns for the soundtracks being too loud in the Vampire Cop series. I have tried my very best to reduce soundtrack volume in this video and have even re-narrated some stories just so it sounds better. Now that this video is out, I can begin writing season 2. I do hope you enjoy, and if you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Until the next one, do take care. Ragnar, the 6'8", 2-meter-tall warrior descendant of giants, washed his face over a wooden barrel filled with rainwater. He had long blonde hair, mostly in an untidy ponytail, and a long bushy beard, like a wizard. There were scars all over the man's face, making him look rugged and unappealing. Scars made over a long period of time from countless of battles, since he was a mere child. His fellow knights walked past him, cheering and praising their recent victory. The great battle of Harrow was won all thanks to the captain of the Night Watch, Ragnar Liefsson. He saw the celebratory gesture and gave a vague smile. They said, "Tonight the Harrow's in, let us indulge in mead till our hearts are drunk. What say you, Captain? We shall sing songs of praise and make people write stories about us, just so we could be remembered for centuries from now." The Night Watch consisted of 7 knights, including Ragnar as their captain. They were elite warriors and their skills were extraordinary. Be it their brute force, speed and fluidity with weapons, or sheer courage and will, they had it all. They would get paid by pouches of coin from residents of each town or village they worked in. Often, Ragnar and his group of 5 men and 1 woman would do work for free if they saw the village or town struggling. The Night Watch was seen as a group of exterminators that got rid of any pests. And by pests, I mean hunters that fell to shady dark practices. Monsters, vampires, werewolves, but never demons. Not yet, at least. But what exactly was the Great Battle of Harrow all about? This was a triumphant victory that made the history books on how 7 knights saved a village of 500 people without losing their lives. The knights got word the village of Harrow was going to be attacked. This was merely a premonition from an old lady, yet the warriors obliged. They gathered round the village, asking questions, trying to prepare for the Battle of Harrow. However, the villagers weren't of much help. Instead, they were excited to see the knights in person rather than just hearing stories about them. Although, before the attack could even take place, villagers handed large sacks of coin to the Night Watch. Strike 1. While the knights were on patrol, a horde of humanoid, zombie-like creatures stormed the Harrow. Some were slow, some were quick, but others were extremely violent. Ragnar was the first to hold them off, and then his knights joined him. First horde at 50, second at 65, third at 43. They just kept coming. The knights spread out and took each corner of the Harrow, protecting the village with their lives. The only way they killed these humanoid creatures was by removing their heads. Wave after wave, the knights slew them down. Swift strikes with their swords, shields high and held strong, making sure that none of them faltered. Ragnar Liefsson enforced that rule: you always protect the one next to you, skilled or not. However, the battle reached a point where even he got tired. The onslaught lasted for 30 minutes straight with not a single moment to catch one's breath, especially when swinging steel swords that large and that fast. Finally, Ragnar dealt the finishing blow to the last humanoid creature. At the end of the battle, the knights banged against their armor with their heavy shields to celebrate the victory, but not their captain. He remained deep in thought. "What's the matter?" the Night Watch asked. The giant warrior shook his head and frowned. He said, "Tend to your wounds if you have any, and I will join you shortly." Ragnar's focus was on the creature that lied in front of him. This is where everything changed. They were not evil per se. These creatures never knew how to fight. Sure, in numbers they could overwhelm you, but they were ordinary. Ragnar knelt down and snatched the name tag from one of the corpses. This name tag was similar to the one his wife wore. The type of name tag that would be found on all the teachers that taught at village schools. Ragnar knew this person, but he had died more than 6 months ago. The term zombie had never been created at the time. Anything other than a vampire or werewolf was just referred to as an unknown creature. But the army which the knights had fought weren't monsters. In fact, they were the undead. This entire mission seemed off. The village folk stood by the window staring blankly, almost disappointed that the knights were victorious. Not a single villager exited their homes. Now, as Ragnar wiped down the water from his face and muscular body, the warrior still thought about that night. The villagers' strange and eerie expressions had not changed. Ragnar also realized that with each wave they held off, the villagers were never in any danger. Not a single creature diverted or attacked their homes. It seemed like the Night Watch were the targets all along. The warrior knight had entered his old wooden temporary home and checked on his wife Luna and early teen son Maximus. Luna, the much shorter woman with long curly red hair, was jittery ever since the night of the battle. She kept pulling and peeling the skin of her lower lip with her fingers and bounced her knee in anxiety. Luna knew exactly where the creatures came from. She knew the people in the village were the ones in on this whole thing. She knew the undead army was summoned by the crone behind the stone wall. The harrow had a large stone wall, so large that it reached a height way past the eye could see. No one knew who built it, only that it's been there since the beginning of time. No one crossed the wall, no one questioned it, and no one spoke about it. This was seen as a barrier, like the end of the terrain in a video game that couldn't be crossed. There were gaps in the wall, crevices if you will, probably caused by erosion. Luna wanted Ragnar to stop fighting. It was never the constant shift to temporary homes during battle, rather the concern for her husband's health, even though he was the strongest warrior in the world. Then at dusk, before the Battle of Harrow, Luna pulled the clothes from a makeshift clothesline made of long white thick string. She flared and dusted out the clothes, then folded them neatly inside the basket. The village was quiet, almost silent since the knights patrolled the far end, while the village folk hid inside their homes in so-called fear. Then, Luna heard a knocking sound coming from behind the wall, and so she approached. The crevices were too small to see through, but there was a large gap in the stone wall. Luna walked slowly towards it, closing her left eye while taking a sneak peek with her right. Behind the wall was a cemetery. It looked like a barren land with crows landing on tombstones and dried grass everywhere. However, the knocking sound came from a long rod of sturdy wood, held and used by an old woman as a walking stick. This old woman wore a dark, shaggy black hooded cloak, while she walked to each grave reciting something in an unknown language, followed by 3 gentle knocks on each tombstone using her walking stick. Despite Luna not knowing what the old woman was saying, it just felt off. Something about her monotone, deep voice and the words being said just sounded evil with so much of ill intent. Then Luna leaned against the wall with too much of pressure, and a few fragments of stone crumbled and fell to the other side. The old, malnourished woman lifted her head within a split second and looked towards the wall. Her neck twisted towards the side in an abnormal manner, breaking, and then she bolted towards the wall. Luna screamed as she backed away, her heart racing, slamming against her ribcage. She swallowed her saliva in gulps, her breath short and heavy, panting like an animal. The gap between the wall now seemed like the abyss. Luna, however, remained staring at it. Maybe she imagined it. Maybe there was no old creepy lady behind the wall. Maybe the exhaustion and scorching heat had finally taken its toll. But she was wrong. The old woman's face emerged ever so slowly behind the gap, showing her rotten teeth and discolored gums.
"Do not be afraid, my dear,"
she said in a spooky, shrill voice.
"Come closer."
I said come closer.
Her face changed after that command. Wrinkly, scaly skin like a dragon or lizard. Massive black eyes filled with emptiness and only a mere speck of yellow as the pupil. Its nose long and pointy, teeth sharp, slender, and all the same length. Luna dropped the clothes basket and ran inside the house, trembling with fear. As she looked out the window at the other houses, there were 10 or so village folk that stood at their respective windows and gave an eerie smile so wide it seemed their jaws were broken. Their eyes large and round, covered by complete darkness. They put their fingers to their lips and gestured to Luna. Shh. Strike 2. The red-haired woman was a steadfast teacher and wife to one of the greatest warriors that ever lived. Yet, for the first time, she felt truly terrified. The knights were still on the other end, the spot where they got tipped off, while the same eerie village folk banged on Luna's door and windows. They whispered to her while turning their heads side to side unnaturally. "You say anything and we shall take the boy. The same way we took the other children," they said. Luna's eyes widened as she backed away, stumbling onto the wooden floor. It was right in front of them the entire time. 500 villagers, and yet Maximus was the only child in the harrow. The rest were taken. Maximus was sleeping when Ragnar entered the home. Luna, nervous and afraid as ever, thought this would be a good time to share the information with her husband. When she leaned in, the eerie villagers tapped on her window and smiled, making her backtrack immediately. Ragnar repeatedly asked her if everything was okay, but he received no response. He thought maybe his wife was unwell and so decided to fetch medicine for her not too far away. He also needed to get firewood for the night before leaving. Maximus woke up from his sleep after hearing his father and chose to tag along. Ragnar, wearing his normal everyday village warrior attire, left with his son on this errand. The medicine cottage wasn't too far away, therefore gathering firewood for the night could wait for now. Luna was way more important. The remedy store was busy, hence father and son stood in line waiting for the medicine. Meanwhile, the moment the warrior and his son left, the villagers stormed into Luna's home. They surrounded her as she panicked and swung a candlestick wildly and viciously in semicircles. "Get back, you monster," she yelled. They dragged her out of her home and put a cloth in her mouth. This will be over soon, the village folk told her. Once Maximus becomes the sacrificial lamb and Ragnar becomes a servant of the demon, they would get their gold. Since Luna was Ragnar's strength and weakness, removing her from the equation would weaken his spirit. They tied her up in chains and kept her in the village basement. It was only a matter of time for this evil cult to get their reward. Their disgusting, dark practices of selling their souls to a higher demon, all in exchange for wealth till the day they died. No wonder they had so much of coin to give to the Night Watch. They never were in any danger. Sacrificing their children every year was their offering to the demon. However, these horrid and despicable, pathetic, evil village folk needed one more. Maximus, the son of the strongest warrior alive. They knew Ragnar never ever left his family when preparing for battle. The undead army was released to take out the other knights, not Ragnar Liefsson. Once they managed to lure the warrior and child into the harrow, the demon would do the rest. This task alone wasn't easy, not by a long shot. Those who fought back against these evil, foul practices, well, as Ragnar recognized the beloved teacher in his undead form, so were the others killed and buried in the cemetery behind the stone wall. Ragnar and Maximus left the remedy store with medicine in hand, but the moment they neared the village, the villagers with smug looks plastered on their faces handed him a letter. "Your wife told us to give you this," they said. This letter was roughly written without any meaning. It was brief, straight to the point, and still enough to break the warrior's heart. Luna wrote that she had been seeing another man for a while. She tried to tell him, but he was always busy fighting battles. Ragnar took time to read since he was uneducated, but Maximus helped him along the way. There was a half-hearted apology at the end signed with her name. The warrior knight was so hurt by the news that he never realized it wasn't even Luna's handwriting. In his mind, picturing her with another man was enough to cloud his judgment. The warrior was more hurt by the fact that she abandoned Maximus. If Ragnar was always traveling, not earning enough, then so be it. But the boy did nothing wrong. He crumpled the paper in his giant hand and threw it on the floor. Maximus was still too young to comprehend what was going on, and before he did catch on, Ragnar took him to the woods to collect firewood. A million thoughts ran through his mind, fueled by emotions of anger and despair. Right now, he needed a distraction, and there was nothing better than taking out all of his anger on a tree with a powerful axe. He roared and grunted with each swing, frightening Maximus. The boy never saw the side of his father before. Then 5 of Ragnar's knights, adorned in their knight armor, had entered the woods. Ragnar stopped and caught his breath. Was there another mission? He asked. The knights nodded their heads. One that just came up, they said. Ragnar, being the faithful warrior that he was, dropped the axe immediately, then sturdied himself upright. The firewood, while less, would be enough for Maximus tonight. He gently held the boy's hand, preparing to leave for home, when he asked, "How come there's only 5 of you? Where's Ingrid?" Ingrid was the only female in the night watch, 6'5", specimen of a woman. She saw Ragnar as her bigger brother, a mentor and a pillar of strength. Her undying loyalty to him was nothing short of remarkable. The knights all looked at each other and said, "She's dead," as one of them drew their swords and impaled Ragnar's leg. A huge portal opened up in the woods, filled with darkness. Sparks of fiery flame shot out and a 15-foot demon with monstrous horns walked through. Ragnar was down to one knee with absolute shock on his face. Still holding the hand of Maximus protecting him, he looked at his knights and implored, "Why?" "Gold, Captain. Everyone and everything has a price. How long have we served these people, and how long have we lived on scraps? We deserve this. It's unfortunate that it had to be this way, but it's part of the plan." Strike 3. The higher demon shapeshifted into numerous terrifying monsters, trying to find the best fit for him on Earth. Some forms were smaller, others as tall as the trees, yet the 2 horns on his head always remained. This menacing creature was known as Raptor, the demon of rituals. Extremely cunning and deceitful, so evil and treacherous even the other creatures in hell refused to work with him. Ragnar removed the sword impaled from his leg and stabbed the knight in the neck. The warrior knew exactly where the weak points in the armor were. 1 knight down, 4 more to go. With every monstrous stride that it took, the demon walked closer and closer. Ragnar yelled, "Run, Maximus, run! Don't look back, boy!" The boy, fearful as ever, ran like the wind. The demon hastened his pace, chasing after him. And as for Ragnar Liefsson, whether he had one working leg or not, this man was still a better warrior than the rest. For his sheer size to move like water, like the sword and him were one. And one by one the knights began falling. The students could not best their teacher, not when it came to a physical battle. The Night Watch had been destroyed. The bond of loyalty and friendship had crumbled. Ragnar, however, never had the time to take in the disappointment. The demon gained on Maximus. Ragnar tightened the grip on his sword and threw it with all of his might, stabbing the demon's ankle as it grunted and moaned in pain. Ragnar Liefsson ran as quickly as he could, picking up Maximus in his arms, trying to escape the woods together. With every stride that he took, the wound on his leg gnawed at him. Sadly, this was all in vain. The demon never panicked, nor did he hasten his pace anymore. Rather, carried forth an incantation. His voice was in a low, vibrational tone. With each word being uttered, the dark clouds gathered over the woods. Maximus fell from Ragnar's grasp. The bones in the warrior's shoulders began breaking, but how tough was Ragnar that despite the aching pain, he clenched his jaw and pushed forward, trying to pick up Maximus once more. He wasn't as fast as before, nor did he feel stronger anymore. Vicious thunder rumbled in the sky as the incantation continued. Now there was a feeling of negativity looming in the woods. Strong winds blew away the leaves, almost bending the trees with that much force. This time his elbow joints began snapping. Ragnar could mask the pain no more, then let out a loud, painful moan. His entire body was now covered in white fur. His jaws snapped and long, sharp teeth began pushing out of his mouth. Ragnar's nose then grew into his snout. Maximus cried and yelled, unsure whether to stay or run. The boy was indeed brave like his father, but still so young in terms of physical strength next to a 15-foot demon was futile. "Snap out of it, father," he said repeatedly, trying to shake Ragnar's arm. Now the pain was at an all-time high. Ragnar was on his knees with his palms on the ground, screaming in agony. He felt his bones growing and changing shape with each snap and crackle. And then, the White Wolf was born. The werewolf stumbled, trying to sustain a firm posture, 8 feet tall and double the muscle and strength of human Ragnar. The cursed blood pumped through his veins so quickly, his heartbeat could be heard from afar. The werewolf twirled his fingers on the left hand, noticing the razor-sharp claws while clenching his right fist, feeling that power coursing through his body. Maximus, in absolute awe and fear, backed away slowly, whispering to himself that what he was seeing wasn't real. Then the demon snatched him up with one arm and squeezed the boy's shoulder, making him wince in pain. The demon spoke to Ragnar the same way that a master would speak to an underling.
"Serve me,"
he said.
"Let us conquer hell and build our armies and destroy this feeble world. Let humanity fall."
The werewolf looked deep within the eyes of Maximus as he walked towards the portal. Was Ragnar really obeying this evil creature? Was this the ending of the epic warrior's tale? Raptor began smiling. Maximus tried fighting the grip of the demon, screaming and crying in agony. But Ragnar looked at the boy again. Something in the werewolf's eyes spoke volumes. The demon said,
"This isn't your child anymore. Your memories will slowly fade away. Your past life will diminish and your new life will only exist to serve me. You will share the powers that I do. Now, kneel before your master."
And so Ragnar obliged. He walked to the demon slowly this time, almost trying to process everything, then knelt down to one knee. But he was amazed that the wound earlier, caused by the sword from his knight, had healed. And as Raptor smiled and Maximus yelled for his father to save him, Ragnar waited for the perfect timing. The same wounded ankle on the demon was sliced clean off by the werewolf's sharp claws. The demon roared at Ragnar with anger. Maximus used this moment to bite the demon's arm just so that he could let go. but Raptor tossed the boy into the portal, shapeshifted and followed through. The werewolf's eyes widened as he roared back. Ragnar sprinted forward and leaped towards the portal, consuming the werewolf entirely. He heard the voice of Maximus echoing through, calling out to him. The werewolf landed on his scapula, then rolled to his feet. Once he dusted the dirt off his soft white fur, he looked at his surroundings. This was no city, town, or village. This was hell. Such a strange and foul place. Tall, dark, sharp, pointy rocks and mountains. Large dungeons spread throughout. Chains, cages, and a stench so rotten, the werewolf tried not to puke. But that wasn't the weird part. Hell was on fire. There were pits and flames almost everywhere he looked, yet it wasn't hot, rather cold. Especially to a werewolf that had thick fur meant to keep him warm. Then, to top it off, Ragnar maybe spent about 2 minutes in hell, so why did he already feel older? He closed his eyes and listened carefully. The werewolf's ears could hear the faintest of noises. Among the screams of the tortured souls, the growls and grunts from what sounded like 3 large hounds. He finally heard it, Maximus's voice. The sound was coming from the dungeon on his far right. So far, the white wolf went unnoticed and he wanted to keep it that way. Ragnar was still getting used to the werewolf body. The dungeon door was slightly opened as the werewolf peeked through. A dungeon filled with the most despicable, unusual-looking creatures that he had ever seen. Maximus was suspended in the air, hovering with dark energy over a fire. Raptor, the higher demon, and the creatures in the dungeon chanted their evil ritual words, sacrificing the boy. The werewolf kicked down the door without hesitation. The door flew and toppled over some of the creatures standing in front. He slaughtered those demons with haste and ease, like a hot knife slicing through a tub of butter. This was the higher demon's mistake. If it was one-on-one, perhaps Raptor would have won, using dark magic. However, letting Ragnar fight all his minions first had only worked in the white wolf's favor. With each fight, the warrior-turned-werewolf had become stronger. The time in hell was different to that on Earth. The reason Ragnar felt older just after spending a few minutes in there is because he actually was getting older. Maximus only retained his youth from the dark magic surrounding him. A few minutes in hell were equivalent to a month on Earth. The werewolf took 6 to 7 minutes to demolish the evil creatures inside the dungeon. The higher demon sped up the ritual before Ragnar could reach him, as this couldn't be interrupted. Raptor indeed created a powerful monster. The werewolf became stronger with each passing minute spent in hell. Every wound sustained healed rapidly, while every punch he threw amplified his strength. Ragnar stepped onto the pile of bodies of the demons he slaughtered and leaped towards Maximus. In one swift motion, the white wolf did not only grab the boy, but sliced Raptor's head clean off. Maximus woke up from whatever deep sleep the child was in, but in all honesty, the boy didn't look too good. Blood poured out his nose as he began coughing, and then a sense of panic found the werewolf's heart. Before exiting the dungeon, Ragnar thought about the main problem. How were they going to leave hell? Then he looked at the higher demon's head on the floor, picked it up and tucked it under his arm. The werewolf wasn't unnoticed this time. The commotion alerted every monster in hell. Hordes of creatures chased down the white wolf and his son. While he ran so fast it seemed like he vanished. Ragnar would have stayed and massacred all of them if the boy wasn't short on time. While the demon's curse did not break the spirit of Ragnar or wipe out his memories, its strength traveled in his blood. With his free arm, the werewolf pointed the demon's head in front of them. Despite the demon's head being removed from its body, the eyes glowed. Then a massive portal opened up in hell, and father and son jumped through. They landed in the woods, same spot as before, but Ragnar protected the boy by taking all the fall damage himself. However, there was no dark energy surrounding Maximus anymore, hence the boy remained the same size but aged rapidly. The wounds he sustained from the ritual magnified, and then, in his father's arms, drew his last breath. That moment, that specific moment, when Ragnar felt like his heart was ripped out of his chest. The warrior felt so much of pain that his face remained expressionless as he carried the body of his son in his arms. Ragnar walked slowly, looking ahead at the village. The village folk were celebrating, thinking their master plan of paying off the knights worked. They chanted and danced with strange and creepy markings on the ground. The crone, however, wasn't foolish. She could sense that intense power a mile away. The old decaying woman felt that aura from the white wolf approaching. When she knew the plan failed dismally, she vanished into thin air while the village folk looked confused. Maybe she would return, maybe she wouldn't. They continued dancing and singing, expecting more wealth from the demon coming their way. Ragnar entered the village much further away from the crowd. He caught a scent. The werewolf's nose snuffed out something familiar. Luna's perfume. The white wolf, still carrying his child, walked behind the houses until he made his way into one of the basements. Earlier his heart broke into a million pieces, but now it was his soul. Ragnar Liefsson hanged herself. With his sharp claw he sliced the chain from above, then carried both his wife and son and gently kept them on a wooden table. There was a letter in Luna's pocket. Ragnar read the letter and felt his soul being trampled over with so much of pain and regret. And then, his eyes glowed red. The white wolf ran at the speed of light back into the woods and picked up the demon's head. Ragnar took it to the top of the mountain overlooking the village. There was a wooden pole stuck in the ground with a sign saying the Harrow. The werewolf removed the sign and slammed the demon's head through the wooden pole. Suddenly, the villagers' dance and song had stopped. They stared at the demon's head and trembled with fear. Their so-called lord has been destroyed. Ragnar slowly walked down the mountain path towards the crowd. He grunted loudly while flaring his nostrils. Thus began the massacre of the village folk inside the Harrow. That day, the Harrow was covered in blood. It seemed like a red flood had taken over the village. His fur was soaked in crimson from the bloodshed. The screams, the torture, the pleas for help were so loud they traveled in the wind. All of Redwater, Houndsville, Cascada, and even the land of Freya heard it. But it wasn't just those sounds that cemented Ragnar as a monster. The demon's head on the mountaintop was enough to send chills down anyone's spine. It wasn't normal for a higher demon to be killed by anyone. Though it was also the fact that no one could enter the Harrow anymore, not for a long while. The white wolf piled the bodies of 500 villagers as a wall blocking the entrance. Well, at least what was left of them. Most people outside the wall walked past it and were horrified, no matter how many times they saw it. He wanted their bodies to rot. He wanted them to turn to dirt on the ground, just so he could step on them even after their death.
My dear Ragnar, I swear to you that whatever these evil people told you I didn't do it. I wish I told you earlier about them, and none of this would have happened. They said they would take Maximus and sacrifice him in a ritual if I spoke. Despite me not talking, they still took me captive. The village folk untied me and told me it was completed. My son Maximus was dead, and my beloved husband was now a servant of hell. A small part of me never believed that, and this is what the letter is for. If what they say is not true, then I know you will find me. I have always loved you, and I am so sorry. I wanted you to stop fighting. I wanted us to be farmers after this last battle and grow the freshest crops in all the land, so no child will ever sleep hungry at night. But if what they say is true, I cannot live a life without you and our dear boy in it. I'm not strong like you. I will always be your moon, lighting up your darkest of nights, and our dear boy, Maximus, will be the brightest star in the sky, always encouraging you to move forward. In this lifetime and the next, I, Luna Liefsson, will always belong to you. Goodbye, my dear Ragnar.
Ragnar Liefsson, the White Wolf, was driven by rage and had turned his heart into stone. It had been 34 years since his wife and son had passed, but that emptiness never diminished, not even in the slightest. There hasn't been a single night since the werewolf had a decent night's sleep. The nightmares of watching everything unfold were too much to bear even for a brave soul like his. Month after month, year after year, Ragnar had been fighting monsters left, right and center. No shortage of them in this world, hoping that with each evil creature he killed, it would lead him closer to the crown that caused the chaos in the Harrow. Alas, the werewolf was wrong. The cunning, manipulative hag was always one step ahead of him. His frustration grew, and the monster within the warrior was battling against his own conscience to fully take over. Ragnar usually took a stroll in the woods to clear his mind. He would walk slowly, playing back the memories of Luna and Maximus. The werewolf could hear her voice in his head. He could see the smile of Maximus in his eyes, the only two things in the world that calmed him down. But somehow the good memories were even more torturous than the bad. There was an old man in the woods with an untidy beard, wearing rags for clothes. A beggar holding a small tin to collect coin. The White Wolf frowned as the man never fled. Folk always ran for their lives whenever they saw the werewolf. But upon closer inspection, Ragnar observed the old man's eyes and saw them full white and murky. The beggar was blind. The man rattled the coin in the tin in the manner to attract Ragnar's attention. The White Wolf said,
"You shouldn't be here, old man. The woods are dangerous. Besides, I do not have coin to give unto thee."
Oh no, it isn't your coin I want, my child, it's your time.
"I'll pass, thanks. Respectfully, if you had your eyesight, you would know who I am. And I am no child, nor am I human."
The hole in your heart from losing your wife and son will not close anytime soon.
The werewolf turned around and walked towards the beggar, fuming with anger.
"Choose your words carefully, old man. Your age will not spare you."
The beggar held his hands up and pleaded his case.
I am no supernatural creature, just an old soothsayer willing to share what I know. Please, my boy, do have a seat.
The werewolf sat on a wooden log in the woods, listening attentively to what the old man had to say. Soothsayers foresee the future, and while Ragnar never believed in such foolishness, no one alive knew what happened to Luna and Maximus. The old man continued.
Most folk call me Engelbert, but I'm so old that even I forget my real name. It was a tragedy what happened to you, my child. Though I cannot physically see, the pain and sorrow I feel from your presence is enough to shatter one's soul. But I say unto thee, heed my words and your quest will be easier. Your bloodlust for the crones will only lead you further away from them. Be patient, my child, for in 100 years' time, in the very woods we sit in will lay a grey werewolf. A werewolf just like you, special in every sense of the word. Though he is no warrior, zero battle experience, scared and confused but also driven by revenge. Stay close to him, O White Wolf. Stay very close, for the grey werewolf is the key to your goal. He would be the righteous hero the prophecy was written for, the one that would battle against the armies of hell and succeed. However, you need not tell me the lack of interest you have in such matters, for I know better. When the grey werewolf is born, the curse will fail. the same way yours did, and the crones would come out of hiding. They could not jeopardize higher demons being eradicated, as they won't have any purpose on Earth. The crones will do anything to get rid of the Grey Wolf, going to great lengths to attack his allies. Become his ally, and the crones will come to you. Work together. Let the werewolf succeed in his journey, and yours would be easier. Look for the purple magical explosion in the woods, and make your decision when the time comes.
Ragnar Liefsson said,
Who are you really, old man? On one hand, your foresight could be true, or you could be working for the crones trying to make me stop hunting them.
Oh, I work for no one, my child. I too want the crones dead. I am just an old blind man stricken with poverty, trying to help as many folk before the end of my days. I must take your leave now, my child. I wish you well on your journey.
The old man stood up, used a long staff-like walking stick and strolled away. Ragnar remained seated on the wooden log, staring at the soothsayer walking away. How true this tale was would be put to the test. It didn't mean Ragnar would sit idly by for 100 years. Though, if the beggar was correct and the Grey Werewolf just like Ragnar will be born, and if he truly was the key to Ragnar's goal, then he would see it through. But there was something very strange about this old man. No soothsayer gives a prophecy that detailed. They would often speak in riddles, and most of the time things don't really end up the same way. Little did Ragnar know, this was no ordinary soothsayer. The White Wolf was speaking to death. Long have I waited for this day. I can feel it in the air. The cold wind of winter whispers to me. My nerves are screaming with anxiety and fear, but somehow I remain calm and composed. Long have I waited for this day. When the Grey Wolf's rage subsides and the barbarians are no more, he will be vulnerable. The crones will see this as a perfect opportunity to sneak up on Victor. But how would they with me around? Long have I waited for this day. The vampire wasn't the only one hiding a deep, dark and secret power. I had to keep it hidden from the hellhound. Patience and perseverance. I cannot fail. Have I lost faith in humanity? Yes. Yes, I have. How much of blood, sweat and tears have I shed for people? How many helpless beings have I served without taking coin for it? How many times have I risked my life for others? Not a single soul helped my wife that day in the village. Not a single soul told me my son would be sacrificed in some foul ritual like a sheep being led to the slaughter. Not a single soul told me the letter was fabricated. I was made a fool. The villagers and the crones made me, Ragnar Liefsson, a warrior knight that fought in more battles than people could ever think of, into a mockery. No, today I will not fail. Still I remember the crone's face, that evil smile showing her rotten teeth, that pale skin tightly wrapped on her bones and her dark hands consumed by decaying flesh. The mastermind behind everything that occurred in the village of the Harrow, how she threatened my wife with her undead creatures. I've seen it in my visions. I will never forget her face. She could change appearances as much as she wanted, but that look in her eyes when she saw me all those years ago could not hide that fear. For if I wasn't distraught and stricken with grief over the death of my boy, I would have ripped her to shreds right then and there. None of them expected me to walk out of hell the way I did. The crones laugh at their victims and their mind games, but would they be laughing when I'm done with them? They do not know that I have been preparing for this moment my entire werewolf life. My daggers, sword, and armor are coated with ointments from the elves and dwarves, which puts a stop to their shape-shifting capabilities and dulls their power. All my training, all my sleepless nights, and all my suffering shall now serve its purpose. I will not falter. Long have I waited for this day. Consider this curse my penance for failing you all those years ago, my beloved Luna. But I swear to you, before your moonlight fades away into the morning sky, I shall avenge your death with every fiber in my being. My dear boy Maximus, before your star stops shining in the night sky, you will guide me to my victory. Your father will punish those that led you to the slaughter. I will make them feel every bit of pain you felt. Long have I waited for this day for villages and towns to be free of dark magic and rituals so that no warrior, father, mother, husband, wife, or child will ever meet the same fate that my family did. Long have I waited for the gateway from hell to this land to be closed permanently, for every demon to burn in the very fires they created. Let no monster, good or evil, stand in my way today. For I, Ragnar Liefsson, the White Wolf, former captain of the Night Watch, a wifeless husband and a fatherless man, shall have my revenge.
Where is he? Hazel exclaimed. Find him and bring him to me, now.
But there was a deep voice that whispered in the woods. The cold winter wind did not bother the crones, but this voice, this was the sound that sent a chill down their spines.
You cannot run from me anymore.
Ragnar the White Wolf stood behind them. He was no coward. He would not attack them from behind. He wanted them to see his face and look into his eyes and know this was the day they die. He unsheathed his silver sword and said,
I'm going to break all the bones in your bodies, and just when your soul is about to leave your flesh, I will resuscitate you and do it all over again.
Young and beautiful, what a facade. Ragnar knew how foul these witches really were. They began circling him, sending their dark magical spells at the werewolf. Ragnar deflected it with his sword, something they never expected. His eyes glowing red and his muscles larger than ever, he dodged their attacks with so much of elegance and ease. His movements were so fluid, almost like this giant weighed less than a feather. Then Esme, the crone that ruined his life, had decided to cast her own magic. The werewolf could see how frightened she was, since she was the weakest. Ragnar roared at her as he watched her stumble backwards. She would not die so quickly. No, the White Wolf would save her for last. Hazel was the strongest from this group, and her magic did in fact wound Ragnar. Each beam, each orb, and every spell sent by her had begun dismantling his armor. As blood filled the werewolf's mouth, he reached behind his back and pulled out large daggers which he tossed at Hazel, slowing her down. Next was Ursula's turn. The switch had sent out a very troublesome form of magic. It looked like shrapnel exploding from a grenade and burnt Ragnar's skin when it touched him. Still, the White Wolf knew to keep his power hidden. It was not yet time. One thing that did bother him though was how weak the crones were. Then, as he ran, dove, lunged and leaped, dodging their attacks, he could not help but feel like something was amiss. Were these all the weaker sisters? Now they were moving in closer. The two crones that checked the perimeter earlier, Hilda and Sabrina, snuck up behind the werewolf. First move was by Sabrina. However, this was no ordinary werewolf they were sneaking up against. Ragnar dashed to the side, sliding on the icy ground, and punched the witch so hard she flew across the woods. Just when Hilda thought she could capitalize while Ragnar wasn't looking, he placed his large arm around her neck, pulled her towards him and slowly pushed his sword through her chest. This wouldn't kill someone like her, just slow her down. Ragnar was still waiting for something. Ursula decided to try once more. This time, her magical orbs were much larger and heavier than before. Ragnar Liefsson held his shield out in front. The elvish medicine and the unique oils and weapons and armor were certainly doing the trick, for now. Then the impact shattered the armor shoulder pads into a million pieces, and just when Hazel was sneaking up on Ragnar to land the finishing blow, he revealed a unique skill of his own. Ragnar the White Wolf could vanish at will. Hazel never had time to process what just happened. Ragnar placed his arm around her neck and said, "If you wanted to die first, you should have told me." Ragnar tossed her to the ground and began stomping on her body. He heard every bone break as the witch choked on her own blood. He picked her up and slammed her again until Hazel couldn't move. And as she lies on the ground lifeless, her body changes from young to old, showing her true, evil, rotten, and vile appearance. One down, 4 more to go. The rest of the crones shrieked in anger after witnessing the gruesome murder of their sister. They had forsaken the spell to make them appear young, then turned into their old selves. All their dark magic, all their evil spells and tricks, were now being conjured up in their hands. Esme, frightened as ever, slowly built an orb of dark energy. Second was Ursula, channeling all her power towards her fingers. Third was Sabrina with a large magical ball spinning rapidly in her palm. Last but not least was Hilda conjuring up roots from the ground just to trap Ragnar and hold him down. This was an attack filled with desperation. Ragnar growled and charged at the crones head-on. With no more dwarven armor or elvish medicine to protect him, with no more shields to lessen the impact, it was time. Now, my dear listeners and viewers, if you really think the White Wolf's hidden power was only vanishing at will, you are sorely mistaken. His secret power was... In 5 seconds, down goes Ursula, her bones broken as Ragnar promised. The witch lied on the ground as she had taken her last breath. Sabrina lay a great distance away with only a fallen branch holding her neck from bending backwards after Ragnar snapped it. Third was Hilda. She was paralyzed from the neck down. This will indeed be a slow and painful death. One crone remained untouched, Esme. The evil witch crawled on the ground, trembling with fear. She said, "How is that possible? You were at 3 places at once." The White Wolf walked towards her, slowly but menacingly, with his large claws ready to slice. Ragnar grabbed the witch and tossed her with all his might against the tree trunk. The branches impaled her body as blood spat out of her mouth. He grabs her once again and pulls her out of the tree. The witch softly moans in agonizing pain. With such force, surely all the bones in her body were broken. But Ragnar repeated the gesture. He grabbed her head and swung her body against the tree trunk with even more might than before. This time blood shot out from her chest as her sternum shattered. "Look at me," Ragnar says as he moves closer towards her. "Look into my eyes and see my wife hanging from a rope in a basement." Once more, he slammed the witch against the tree. He could see it in her eyes. What little life remained was trying to leave her body. "Look into my eyes, you vile creature, and you will see the body of my son." For the last time, Ragnar Liefsson the White Wolf picked up the crone and slammed her against the tree. Her body was mangled. Not a single bone was intact. And as the crone slowly falls to the ground like her corpse was made of rubber, Ragnar steps on her and spits on the ground. The wounds he sustained from the battle began healing, but the blood still stained his white fur, his breathing heavy and his heart aching with pain. But he rose. He rose for his Luna and Maximus. He rose as a father taking revenge for his wife and child. However, Ragnar could hear breathing. Hazel still fighting for her life. Her legs were broken as she dragged herself on the ground. Ragnar Liefsson lifts his giant, monstrous foot up in the air, ready to stomp the crone's face. Then, just as Ragnar was going to deal the finishing blow, he hears footsteps behind him. Footsteps that he did not recognize. Dracula takes off his long gray coat as the winter wind blows through his long hair.
The White Wolf. I expected you to be bigger.
The White Wolf stood strong and snuffed twice. His skin on the bridge of his nose creased while the cold wind ruffled his fur. He then looked at his opponent up and down while sizing him up, and said, "Vampire." Dracula, too, shared the same smirk, his long grey hair blowing in the wind as he loosened up his body. Ragnar, however, hid his confusion very well. This was the first vampire that he came across that could survive in the cold. The vampire lord and the knight-turned-werewolf, believed to be the strongest in this land, circled each other with only silence filling the space between them. In the blink of an eye, the White Wolf and Dracula dashed at each other, meeting fist to fist, thus beginning our first chapter in the conclusion of Season 1. The collision caused a massive gush of snow and wind in the dark winter woods. The trees snapped at their center and fell to the ground. Hazel dragged herself in the cold snow. Her entire body felt like giving up with every effort that she used. Her nose bled, her jaw dangled, and there was no feeling in her legs. But once she crawled to the tree and leaned against it, she had an evil grin on her face. Ragnar and Dracula were pushed back by the impact. Both of them slid on their front legs, then took their battle stances ready to charge once more. Dracula then changed into the vampire monster, the same creature that flew over Fesliyan's village more than a century ago. The fight was somewhat equal at first. These two powerful beings had different fighting styles and approaches. Ragnar was more patient, studying his opponent's movements, anticipating their attacks, and then trying to deal the finishing blow, whereas Dracula was someone that wanted the fight to be done immediately. Hence the change into the vampire monster, a form that he took that no one has yet been able to stop. With claws, punches, swipes, and tussles, the fight remained a draw right until Ragnar fell to his knees. Did Dracula really get the best of him? Or was there something else that dropped the werewolf? The White Wolf held his stomach and coughed out liters of blood. His bones felt weak and his chest tight. The headaches, the burning, the excruciating pain never seemed to stop. And as Dracula reverted to his human self, with his 7-inch razor-sharp nails at the ready to take the head off the werewolf, Hazel the crone laughed sadistically.
"We got you,"
she said repeatedly.
"I hope your ego is just as bruised as your body, you foolish creature. The big scary Ragnar put down for good, and all thanks to the B team. Oh yes, we were the B team. Perhaps you should thank your lucky stars that Josephine, Philippa, and Isadora weren't here. I know I will die, but I will take pleasure in knowing my 3 sisters will open the gateway sooner or later."
Seconds before Flair Tepish could deal the finishing blow, the branches and the twigs on the ground behind them had begun snapping. A tall figure dressed in a dark black hooded cloak had approached with heavy yet slow footsteps. His voice was not deep like Ragnar's or an eerie whisper like Dracula, rather normal. Vlad Tepes was ready to charge at the mysterious cloaked being, but the crone began hyperventilating and yelled,
"His eyes! Don't look into his eyes!"
The mysterious cloaked being responded, "The vampire best be leaving now. This wasn't a fair fight. However, I do say that out of all the souls that I have taken, yours, Count Dracula, is one that I patiently wait for. Now, while I cannot voluntarily kill you, I just may sneeze in the wrong direction and you all may cease to exist. Shall we try?" Dracula, being the prideful beast that he was, still chose to attack the Reaper. Death winked his eye and the vampire monster was pushed back, flying all the way across the woods and breaking every tree in his flight. This wouldn't kill the vampire, but he would not be getting up for a very long time. The Reaper then turned to the White Wolf and saw him dying on his knees, then said, "The crones cast a nasty spell on you. Every ailment they have temporarily healed from people has now been bestowed upon you. Stomach cancer, bronchial pneumonia, bone disease, you name it." Death used the handle of his scythe and pointed it at Ragnar. He whispered something in a foreign tongue and the White Wolf stopped coughing. His shivering, aches and pains were no more. Hazel began crawling away rapidly, fearful of what little remained of her life. Ragnar was going after her when Death stopped him. Ragnar expressed his frustration of how no one should hold him back, but then he finally stopped when he saw the cloaked being had no face. Deep and pitch black hollow eye sockets that had small fiery eyes peeking through. An eerie elongated skeleton face with a body so dark that it made darkness itself look like a bright summer's day. The White Wolf, in all his battles against the foulest, most despicable and evil monsters, felt fear for the very first time in his life. Then the Reaper said, "We've met before in this very woods, an old soothsayer bestowing information onto you. Surely you can remember."
You lied to me.
"No, I helped you. You were young, reckless and stubborn. You would have killed the grey werewolf if I didn't tell you how important he was." Ragnar Liefsson hid his anger from the Reaper and walked towards Hazel. His life's mission of eradicating them was not going to be put on hold just because Death himself was standing in front of him. The Reaper said, "Do you want to kill the crone because you want to get rid of evil, or do you want to kill them because you failed your wife and son?"
What did you say to me?
"You heard me." Ragnar growled at Death.
You supernatural beings walk around calling the shots, making us humans as puppets and think you know what pain is.
Death was angered by the statement made by the White Wolf as his eyes lit up the hollow eye sockets even more.
Do not preach to me about pain, werewolf. Why don't you do my job for one day and see if you can stomach it? You try standing beside a hospital bed of a 6-year-old, witnessing the final stage of cancer take her life away. You try watching a mother have a miscarriage of a baby boy, and like a beggar, walk into the room and pick up the child's soul.
You lost your wife and son. I sympathize with you, I really do. But seriously, my boy, do not tell me what pain is. I've always thought you were going after the crones just to get to Esme, but I was wrong. Why would you still continue this obsessive witch hunt after avenging your family? You know you cannot defeat Isadora, Josephine, or even Philippa for that matter, and yet you still pursue them. This wasn't a noble cause you were doing. You're a broken man, Ragnar Liefsson, and you were looking to die.
What do you want from me?
Ragnar said. At that moment, Hazel drew symbols on the snow the same way Monrog opens his portals. The old witch with her broken legs crawled through and the portal vanished into thin air. However, the location that she landed at made her regret teleporting in the first place. Not too far away, Hazel heard Lancelot the Goblin speaking to Victor Humbridge. Ragnar the White Wolf roared at death in frustration. He used all his techniques, all the tricks up his sleeve, and yet could not land a single hit on the Grim Reaper.
You let her escape? Why would you do that?
Oh dear. Calm down, Ragnar, before you hurt yourself. Hazel is going to die a horrible death very soon, just not by your hand. Now please, sir, I have a proposition for you, one that involves you being a human again.
Rumpelstiltskin got up from his chair and exited the dark and cold basement. He used a walking stick as he made his way down a dungeon passage in hell. Every monster, every demon, and everything in between that existed in that vile place had bowed down to him. Why wouldn't they, when he was the one that taught demons how to make deals, when he was the king of the underworld? The imp had so much of power, yet very little strength. He had so much of influence without even lifting a finger. But how does one reach such a position of building an empire in the underworld? Rumpelstiltskin walked into his room and looked at what seemed like an endless wooden filing cabinet. He removed the ring from his finger, the same ring that he used for Lancelot, and kept it in one of the drawers. The ring had reached its limit. 100 deals were made, and the cold metal on his finger would not hold any more years. However, when he opened the drawer, there were at least 400 rings kept away, and that was just from one compartment. Rumpelstiltskin, being almost as old as the first angel and demon, had lived a life of stealing the years from others. He made deals by gifting them information that no one, human or supernatural, would be capable of knowing. He was a cunning, devious, and manipulative goblin that no matter how glum things looked, he always had his way. Although his power over the underworld was not just because of his deals, mainly because of the people that served him. The evil goblin opened the door towards the side of his room and saw 3 cloaked beings sitting on chairs. Their dark hooded cloaks covered almost everything of them, but with their hands being visible while unable to fully know by an outsider if they were male or female, one thing was indeed certain: these mysterious beings were somewhat human. The first being stood up and bowed his head as Rumpelstiltskin smiled and called him son. He had a red-like aura, like mist or smoke, that constantly surrounded him. The second one did the same, except she was surrounded by green smoke. This being was much more slender, as her skeleton hands were clearly visible. The third one had blue smoke surrounding him. It was thick and heavy and mainly lingered by his feet, but he too bowed in respect and called Rumpelstiltskin father. Rumors had surrounded these mysterious cloaked beings of being faceless. However, those that have seen their faces spent nights on end in the hospital beds, stricken with severe nightmares, right until their hearts stopped beating. Rumpelstiltskin coughed as old people do and then sat down on his chair. "My children," he tells them, "the trials are going to begin. It seems your brother's rebellious behavior and disrespect towards me has begun taking its toll. I do not concern myself with the downfall of this hell or the land itself, for I know there are many worlds and timelines that we have lived through and will continue to do so. However, if your brother succeeds in his plan, the underworld in every timeline will cease to exist. Find him and bring him to me. Dead or alive, it doesn't matter." Rumpelstiltskin tapped his walking stick on the ground as the 3 cloaked mysterious beings bowed once more and left at once. They moved like the smoke surrounding them, quick, frightening, and elusive. As those dark, cloaked, phantom-like beings rode on their horses of similar color, they vanished into a portal and set out on their mission. But Who were these mysterious beings that loyally served Rumpelstiltskin the imp and caused so much of fear in the underworld? Similar to how the timeline in this world has been shifted for Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel and Jack and Jill thus shares the same timeline with Rumpelstiltskin. His story pretty much remains the same as the tale that we know, with 4 major differences. When the miller sold his daughter to the king from lying that she could spin straw into gold, the king ordered her to do just that in his castle. In despair, the woman did not know what to do, as no human could turn straw into gold. However, the miller's daughter met an imp in the castle who never revealed his name. This goblin-like creature fulfilled the task the king gave to her and did indeed turn straw into gold. The king was impressed that this beautiful woman in his castle could be worthy of such a feat. He was pleased with her and married her to his son. However, the woman did not forget the goblin that helped her. One day, the miller's daughter snuck out the castle and saw him sitting around the fire in the woods. With tears of joy, she says to him, "Oh, thank you, dear goblin. It is because of you the king chose me to marry his son. But how could I ever repay you?" The goblin smiled cunningly and said, "If you cannot tell me my name by the time you give birth, you shall gift me your firstborn child. No exceptions, that is my deal," he said. "Or your secret shall be revealed to the king." Time passed and the beautiful woman lived a happily married life, but when she got pregnant, fear consumed her body when she remembered what the goblin said. She tried and tried by asking every villager, every townsfolk, and every angel in existence what was the goblin's name, but to no avail. Since Rumpelstiltskin was a demon, with only the underworld knowing who he was. And in this version, the miller's daughter never did find out his name. She had no choice but to give her firstborn away and lie to her king, her husband, and every servant in the castle that her child was taken. The goblin carried the child and placed him on a warm, cozy bed inside his old village home. The miller's daughter, however, did not realize that she was the 4th victim of Rumpelstiltskin's scheme, as he had taken 3 other babies that he had taken care of 1 month apart from each other. He loved them like a father and gave them everything they ever needed. And as they remained lying down on the bed with the most adorable smiles in all the land, Rumpelstiltskin said, "Well, I'm going to have to keep suitable names for the powers that I give to you, my dear children." Now, as much as Belru the first werewolf was blamed for changing the timeline of this world, it all began with Rumpelstiltskin and his greed and cunningness for power. It was no wonder that everyone in hell, heaven and earth feared the goblin creature, since he had the most powerful children. And as the 2 horsemen and 1 horsewoman, famine, conquest, and war, ride on their dark and evil horses, surrounded by their respective auras, they search for their brother, hoping to stop him from meddling in the lives of humans and causing the downfall of the underworld. However, the mystery remains. Why is Death trying to help the werewolves? The werewolf and the reaper sat on wooden logs opposite each other, the same way they did more than 100 years ago when Ragnar spoke to the soothsayer. The werewolf said,
"So you want my help to get rid of your siblings? Why?"
Death explained everything as best as he could. Ragnar and Victor felt that eradicating the crones and the demon army respectively will fix the world's problems, and while that may be true in this current timeline, it will not hold in others. The folk calling the shots aren't angels and demons. They exist to exterminate humans, the way one would open the tap and rinse away ants from the basin. Both parties do manipulate humans, however, for different agendas. Conquest is a being that does not like getting his hands dirty. Instead, uses the gullibility and controllable nature displayed by human folk. Discrimination, prejudice, segregation, these are the seeds planted by conquest. Seeds that rapidly grow with how easily manipulated humans can be. Then they begin turning on each other. Conquest creates divide with status, religion, and ethnicity. He watches the humans feed off each other, figuratively of course, from a mere thought inflicted upon them, kind of like how doubt grows into suspicion. War was quite the obvious one, and the Reaper never felt the need to go into detail. Ragnar himself knows war very well from the countless of battles fought for kings and their foolish agendas of what right or wrong was. War would be the toughest fight that the White Wolf will have, if Ragnar accepted the mission. Famon's horse depicts her very well. Old, decaying, foul-smelling and evil to its core. Her power is instilling sickness into the world. Plagues, ailments, pandemics, epidemics. Her ruthlessness knows no bounds. Famine takes pride in watching humans suffer a slow, painful, and agonizing death. Speaking of death, his purpose in the universe is to retrieve the souls of the fallen. Consider him to be the janitor cleaning up the mess of his siblings. Contrary to popular belief again, the Grim Reaper does not cause death. Often misunderstood and mistaken to be an evil being, he is merely a messenger and retriever of souls. In the mind of the Reaper, he knows how and when everyone is going to die. Though, since the timelines of different worlds were altered, the timing and manner of one's demise becomes tricky. The Reaper was a child when this power was given to him, same like the rest of his siblings, and while they embraced it, he didn't. This power, this life, being an entity of this magnitude, was never what he wanted. When the Reaper tried walking away from this life, it had created chaos in the afterlife. Souls that were meant to be sent to heaven were sent to hell, and vice versa. There were innocents that were being tortured, whereas the most evil, despicable humans had an eternity of paradise. Ragnar asked, "When your siblings are gone, then what happens to you?" Death replied, "Oh, I will perish into dust, something that I look forward to. There will be no heaven or hell when I am gone. There will be no souls wandering the veil or being trapped into purgatory. When a person dies, either cremated or buried, they will merge with the wind, air, water, fire, and space itself. I am the easy part, werewolf. Living. Now that's difficult."
Why did you stop me from killing the crone?
Like I said, she will die, just not by your hand. Leave the crones for the goblin and the hellhound. Their mission of living in this land is hindered by those witches. You fought Monrog. Do you really think that he will fail at taking them out? The White Wolf never answered Death's question, but said,
Your offer of turning me into a human sounds too good to be true. Why would you want to do that?
You, Ragnar Liefsson, remind me a lot of a great warrior soul that I have taken from a different timeline. His name was Achilles, a brave and valiant warrior, the best of his kind. However, there is more to that. When I delivered your wife's soul to heaven, she told me about the letter. She wanted you to stop fighting and become a farmer, and provide food for the children stricken with poverty. Forgive me, werewolf, but I do not see any child willing to take any crop of yours with those massive red eyes staring into their soul. You shall fulfill your wife's dying wish, and at the end, I get what I want. Would you like a glimpse?
The werewolf stood in front of Death, standing firm in the snow. What was the Reaper going to do? His heart began racing and the nerves crawled all over his fur. Death pointed his scythe at Ragnar, and gradually the fur began shedding. The long nails were short, his sharp long teeth reduced in size, the red eyes became smaller, turning human, and the White Wolf was now the warrior that he always was. His long blonde hair was in a ponytail, his muscles strong and large, and his skin rugged from all the battles that he fought in. Then a tear rolled down Ragnar's eye as he looked at both of his hands. However, the moment of pure bliss soon faded when he reverted to a werewolf again. Death said, "A glimpse, werewolf, only a glimpse." Listen well, Reaper. You are recruiting me because I am capable of doing this job. I graciously accept your offer. However, if I can take out famine, war, and conquest, then I can take you out as well. You deceive me in any way, shape, or form. I care not about the powers that you possess. I will find a way to kill you.
Ragnar, with his blood-red werewolf eyes, looked at Death while Death smiled back. I shall make a note of that. Then, in the distance, the Reaper heard the neighing of 3 horses. Despite not having a human face, he showed an expression of fear with his eyes. We need to hurry, he said. We cannot face them now, and certainly not while they are united. This would be a fight that both of us will lose dismally. The Reaper grabbed his scythe and spun it in a motion that would mimic canoeing. Ragnar placed his hand on Death's shoulder, and both of them vanished into thin air. The White Wolf walked with Death into a land that looked familiar, but resembled nothing of its natural state. A barren land with buildings in ruin, warriors fallen to the woes of battle, and the smell of decay looming in the air. Among the battlefield laid werewolves, monsters and evil creatures which received a blind eye from Ragnar the werewolf. Instead, his red eyes widened by the innocent folk that lay next to his friends slaughtered on the land. He knelt down and picked up Eleanor the elf in his arms while howling in pain. He turned around and placed his hand onto the body of his best friend, Berthold the dwarf. Alongside them were Monrog the hellhound, Lancelot the goblin, Myra the witch, and Fesliyan the vampire cop, slain in the most brutal way possible. Ragnar growled at the Grim Reaper standing next to him.
What cruel game are you playing with me? What monster would be capable of doing such a thing?
Death took a deep breath in and exhaled slowly, then said, "You did, 5 years from now." This land that showed the werewolf was part of a different timeline. Ragnar witnessed everything unfold through flashbacks in hologram form that played back constantly. Then the Reaper said, "This is no illusion, werewolf, nor is the sorcery. I am not here to play tricks on you. This whole process is just for me to show you why I stopped you from killing the rest of the crones." The message the Grim Reaper was trying to convey was a difficult one. Timelines, multiple universes, same worlds with different outcomes was a complex concept to grasp. While walking through the barren land of Redwater and the Harrow, Ragnar saw a hologram that struck fear in his heart. He saw a version of himself that gave him nightmares while being very much awake. A ferocious, tall and muscular werewolf with white fur, sharp teeth, red eyes, and blood dripping from its mouth. He saw a monster driven to insanity, clawing at his own face, almost trying to scratch an itch of madness that never subsided. He became evil incarnate. He was the monster possessed by bloodshed that everyone painted him out to be. But how did that happen? The Grim Reaper has followed the White Wolf in many timelines, but this was the only timeline in which death found him first. In every other world, the Reaper was too late, thus turning Ragnar into a rage-driven beast or suffering a fate worse than death itself. In the timeline displaying the flashbacks in hologram form, the hunt for the crones drove the werewolf insane. Despite slaying them down as viciously as he could, the guilt and emptiness in his heart for failing his family had magnified. When all the monsters were destroyed, when all the demons lived in fear, Ragnar turned on the innocent. From villages to towns, the White Wolf left a trail of bodies in his path that were too gruesome to show or even describe. Then the elf and dwarf tried to stop him. At first, both of them were winning the fight, But Ragnar's rage switched off every bit of feeling that he ever had. His best friends became unrecognizable. Fillion, Myra, and Lancelot joined the fight, almost defeating Ragnar, but sadly met their demise shortly after. Mornrog the Hellhound, wounded from fighting monsters larger than buildings, tried defeating the evil Ragnar, but he too was slain by the werewolf's hands. Be it his evil, sadistic smile or an 8-foot-tall, muscular werewolf charging towards you at full speed, his fights were won before they even began. The Grim Reaper and the werewolf continued their path on the land, flashbacks playing one after the other constantly, and then Ragnar finally saw the evil version of himself laying on the ground with his head removed. He sighed in relief and said,
The Grey Wolf was nowhere to be seen. I take it that he survived the trials and came out unscathed.
Death replied, Of course he did. Victor was the one that put you down.
This was so much for Ragnar to take in. His mind felt empty and his heart heavy. He felt his stomach in knots and his legs weak from seeing what the future version of himself was capable of doing. Then all the holograms disappeared from the ruined land. The Reaper spun his scythe, relocating him and Ragnar into the Forest of Death. A dark, spooky forest covered in fog and an eerie silence.
Is this forest part of the timeline that you have just showed me?
Nope, this is my void. My home, really. Space nor time will work here.
The Reaper sat down, looking at Ragnar's eyes, focusing on the ground.
You look troubled, werewolf, and rightfully so. I am sure that you have a lot of questions.
My mind has always been stronger than my body. I have fought in many wars and met evil kings that tried to poison my thoughts, yet not once have I ever succumbed to their evil intentions. Why did this version of myself that you showed me fall to such a cowardice demise?
Death reached inside his long black cloak and pulled out a book. When he opened it, Ragnar got nervous, thinking the Reaper would ask him to read from it. The warrior-knight-turned-werewolf had difficulty reading, having not received education from fighting in wars at a very young age. His wife and son, Luna and Maximus, were the ones teaching him every day. Ragnar Liefsson was proud of how smart his boy was growing up to be. He loved the way Luna taught him with so much of love and affection, something Ragnar Liefsson was not used to. The Reaper smiled.
Don't worry, werewolf, this book is just for me to explain something, that is all. My siblings and I each have this book. This book contains all the rhymes, fairy tales, and fables that have ever been written. Stories that became widely popular in every timeline told throughout history. Hundreds of versions exist of each, like Jack and Jill, Red Riding Hood, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, The Boy Who Cried Wolf, Jack and the Beanstalk, which is my personal favorite by the way, and many more in here. Though we have noticed that in every other timeline, these fables stem from the imagination, mere stories that creative minds write. But in your timeline, these fables aren't just fictional stories, they are realities. Hence, that is the reason why angels and demons are so fixated on your world. Of all the timelines that have passed, this is the first one with so many abnormalities. Werewolves, vampires, mythical monsters can roam freely. Portals from hell can easily be opened and angels can mingle with humans, the same way Jorah mingled with Belru.
The Reaper then pulled out one more book that had over 1,000 timelines. Ragnar has appeared as a werewolf in 4 of them so far. Death said,
Your downfall in the future was caused by my siblings, conquest, famine, and war. I shall explain everything, werewolf, but would you like a chair?
Ragnar looked around him, baffled by the question since there were no sign of chairs inside the dark forest. The Reaper tapped his scythe against his leg as a wooden chair appeared out of nowhere for the werewolf.
Before I begin, you must remember that I am here to help you. These stories might hurt you deeply and I do ask you for your forgiveness in advance. I shall begin with the holograms that you just saw. That is the doing of conquest.
Conquest was the youngest among the riders of the apocalypse. He was also the weakest in terms of physical strength, but the strongest in terms of intellect. He was always the needy sibling. While famine, war, and death were so strong and impressive, Conquest found other means to make a name for himself. Means that could control the human race without even lifting a finger. The old adage goes, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me." But in this case, the words of Conquest can break down even the strongest of warriors that ever lived. His words plant seeds in the mind's garden. A garden that appears to be filled with the most beautiful flowers that have ever been grown, ruined by the weeds of doubt. He knows your deepest, darkest fears. He knows your insecurities and how to make them come alive. Conquest has a long whip that has hooks at the front. Now, while he rarely uses it, when he found Ragnar in the old timeline, he used the weapon against the White Wolf. Ragnar's story in that world shared the identical timeline that he was currently in. He was a brave warrior-knight-turned-werewolf, stricken with pain and sorrow from losing his wife and son to dark practices caused by demons and witches. The whip wrapped around Ragnar's head while the hooks dug into his brain, oozing out malicious thoughts invoking the werewolf's biggest fears and insecurities. He poisoned the mind of Ragnar using tactics of manipulation and deceit, making the werewolf a perfect weapon to bring the downfall of his world. Conquest used the White Wolf's obsession with hunting the crones against him. However, the tragedy was, Ragnar had already killed the crones. Yet in the faces of every man, woman and child, he saw the crones very much alive, thus slaughtering innocent folk. No matter how much the White Wolf tried to fight the hold Conquest had on his mind, he could not break free. He manipulated the werewolf's thoughts to such an extent that every human Ragnar refused to kill, he would get visions of Luna and Maximus convincing him to avenge their death. But after the first murder, it became a chain of brutal, merciless killings that he couldn't stop. However, in the current mission of destroying the riders of the apocalypse, Ragnar's quest won't be so easy despite knowing the dangers Conquest presents. Conquest knows what Death is trying to do, therefore he has appointed a bodyguard. They call him the Beast of Burdock Mountain. No one really knows if this creature is a demon or was born a monster, but his power rivals that of Monrog the Hellhound. Leviathan, the Beast of Burdock Mountain, is a giant dark monster with horns on either side of its head which resemble antlers. With hollow eye sockets and glowing red eyes, with razor-sharp shark-like teeth and speed that matches Fesliyan the vampire, he can divide his cells in producing 2 more versions of him in battle. However, there is one more troublesome skill the creature has. Leviathan follows Conquest wherever the rider goes, though no one else can see him except for Conquest, famine, war and death. The void or hideout that Conquest uses is called Arkborn. This is a beautiful world with thriving vegetation, gorgeous lakes, rivers and streams, stunning mountain formations and architecture that one could only dream of. However, on the inside, this is a world thriving with segregation and the downfall of humanity. The human folk do not fear monsters from taking the lives of their brethren, since they do it themselves. They burn each other alive with their only motive being discrimination. That world is not a matter of fearing the werewolf that lurks in the woods at night. Rather, it's living with the paranoia, wondering whether your neighbor was going to take your life before your head hits the pillow. And this was the doing of Conquest. Falsify hatred between the populations and watch them do the rest. Now, as weak as Conquest may be in terms of physicality, the troublesome questions prevail. Will Ragnar be able to defeat Leviathan without being able to see the monster? And if so, will he be able to deal the finishing blow to Conquest before the rider wraps his whip around Ragnar's mind once again? With her slender, pale-skinned body covered in decaying flesh and sores, with her rotten teeth, sunken eyes, and dirty fingernails, Famine might convince others that she was weak. However, Death knows his sister's strength rivals that of his. Some people who are born in this world are said to be gifted. Now, while I do not believe in talent, rather hard work and practice, even I cannot refute that there are some people that exist with a soulful calling. Be it art, writing, forms of media such as acting or dance, it just comes naturally to them. If Famine did not become a rider of the apocalypse, one might believe her to be the best biochemist out there. Her specialty is both life and chemical sciences, understanding the chemistry and molecular changes that occur in living cells. Her void is called Forgerist. This peculiar place is a dark swamp that has green mist and fog hovering over the land. The wetland contains thousands of plagues and viruses at her disposal, and while those are fatal, the smell of the swamp alone would be enough to kill you. Next to the swamp is Famine's dungeon, used as her laboratory. With jars and test tubes scattered around the cold, dirty floor engulfed by sulfur, this evil being spent eons creating deadly diseases to poison every world in every timeline. Famine, however, does not have a specific weapon like Conquest. Her viruses and diseases would be the only weapons that she ever needed. However, she does have protection. Her horse, old, foul, and decaying with green eyes, is the only horse among the riders that doesn't need a portal to travel through space and time. Death has spent many centuries trying to kill it with no avail. If he didn't know better, he would think Famine's horse wasn't a horse at all, rather a supernatural entity that could shapeshift. Famine's secondary protection comes from her army, a skeleton tribe carrying all sorts of poisoned weapons that can be summoned by the snap of her fingers. However, the weapons wielded by the skeleton army are more than just poison. When they are summoned, their weapons are tailored to the one they are fighting. For example, if Famine was up against a werewolf, the skeleton army would use long-range weapons poisoned with silver or wolfsbane, since those were the weaknesses of werewolves. Her futile attempts of recruiting the evil Ragnar in the previous timelines disappointed her greatly. Then there was one timeline that reached her doorstep, in which she gained full control over the werewolf. Sharing the similar features as Famine, the werewolf was slender, his muscles long and elongated, with his flesh rotting and falling off with every step that he took. But Famine never needed him to be this giant warrior. Ragnar became the carrier of her diseases. With every bite inflicted from the werewolf, sicknesses would spread from human to human in every town and village. With every victim dying by Famine's sicknesses, she gets stronger. Not only would the infected become werewolves, but they would also spread the disease with each person they turned or killed. The white wolf was a puppet. He had no conscience. He had no feeling. With the werewolf immune system that kept him alive from every disease that was given to him by Famine, Ragnar was a living corpse. Ragnar lived in that timeline as a weak and pathetic werewolf, having no background of being a valiant warrior, rather a village farmer. Luna and Maximus had died from his werewolf bite when Famine cursed him to become a werewolf and poisoned his crops. 600 years later, Ragnar reached his oldest age and served no purpose to Famine anymore. Her skeleton army devoured his body like vultures, storing the remaining ailments in their bones for Famine to reproduce. Now, in the forest of death, the Reaper took a break from telling the story, then looked at Ragnar and said,
Ragnar, look, I know this isn't easy to listen to, so if you would like me to stop, I would.
No, I need to hear this. I need to know how weak the previous versions of me were. I need to know how fragile my mind was to incumber to a life of helplessness. I need to know how I failed so I could not repeat those mistakes again.
Well, there's only one more mention of you, werewolf. One more timeline and one more rider. My brother, War. However, when I tell you the story, you're going to have to be strong, for this, in my opinion, was your worst fate.
Ragnar Liefsson was a brave warrior just the way that he was now. His skills on the battlefield would not only be marveled by his fellow comrades, but also those that set eyes on him whenever he fought. He would take on individual contracts as well, helping villages and towns get rid of evil monsters harassing innocent folk, which caused the loss of livestock. Then, one day on his way back home from a great medieval battle, he stumbled upon a werewolf on his path in the dark, lonely woods at night. The werewolf was tall, dark and grey with sharp fangs and red eyes. This was no natural-born werewolf, judging by its upright stance and humanoid mannerisms. He went by the name Victor Humbridge, a servant of war, the rider of the apocalypse. Ragnar, however, never needed his weapons or armor to be a valiant warrior. Not once did he ever shy away from a fight without them. Therefore, he fought the beast in his human form. The warrior knight was a specimen to behold with how large he was, larger than the actual werewolf that he was fighting. He tussled with Victor for 9 whole minutes before breaking the werewolf's neck. However, the warrior did not come out unscathed. Once the adrenaline wore off, Ragnar felt immense pain towards the side of his neck and shoulder. This wound was a bite inflicted from Victor the werewolf. Before this day, there were no such thing as werewolves. Ragnar never knew about curses or werewolf transformations from bites. He grabbed some sand on the ground, rubbed it against the wound, and then continued the path home. When he returned to his village home, his pregnant wife Luna noticed the bite mark on his neck. Ragnar came home with so many wounds from so many battles, but this wound had brought a sense of unease to her. She patched it up as best as she could, then wrote a letter for the village doctor to see Ragnar at once. However, the village doctor was busy that night and could only arrive the next morning. That night, as she lay next to her husband, she could hear him groaning in pain while his body perspired profusely. As the moonlight shone through the window of the dark village home, Ragnar had undergone a painful transformation, turning into a werewolf, then killing his wife and unborn son. Shortly after, War rode into the village wearing his dark black cloak. This was the first and only time the rider showed his face. It seemed like a stainless steel mask was melted onto his face, while his red eyes peeked through the hollow eye sockets. War had the largest horse befitting the rider, since he was 15 feet tall. He brought along every negative emotion that ever existed: anger, hatred, envy, malice, jealousy. His aura was heavy and intimidating, so much so that he brought the villagers down to their knees. War walked into Ragnar's home and tamed the werewolf with so much of ease, just by snapping his fingers. Then the rider wrapped shackles around the werewolf's wrist and took him captive. Rather than making the werewolf fight in battles, causing bloodshed and misery in the real world, he sought out something far worse. Ragnar was desperate to find the killer of his wife and son, having no memory that it was him all along. War turned the werewolf into a demon, torturing innocent souls for all of eternity, believing it was them responsible for his wife's death. The demon werewolf led monstrous armies and served the higher demons like a servant, following orders in search for the truth, not realizing what he was doing. Whenever he got closer to finding out what really happened, his memory would be erased for him to start all over again. Ragnar then turned his focus onto the living by murdering every man in every town and village, taking away the fathers and husbands of innocent women and children. He showed no remorse, no hesitancy, and no guilt. Every man that he set eyes on, old or young, had become a suspect. Ragnar Liefsson became known as the Butcher of mankind, living a life of misery and bloodshed till the end of his days, searching for his wife's killer. One day, when War walked into Ragnar's dungeon, he saw the werewolf hanging from a chain. Some time passed before Ragnar gathered his thoughts. The way that he died in the previous timeline was the same way that Luna did in this one. He looked at the Reaper and said,
What about you? How do you plan on using me in this timeline?
I don't. In all the timelines that I have explained to you, when you die, I die. I know not why we are linked or why my demise follows after yours. But what I do know is, as ironic as it may sound, my death is something that I long for. Once war, famine, and conquest are destroyed, then I shall gladly leave this universe.
I am curious. Where do you rank among your siblings? At my full power and speed, I could not land a single blow on you. And there are not many, both human or supernatural, that could do that to me. You have this persona that makes you seem weak, but you cannot fool me, Reaper.
Now, my ranking isn't important, but it is something that you should know. I could fight my siblings for all of eternity, but I cannot kill them. We cannot kill each other. Though, they can only die with my weapon. Here, catch.
The Reaper threw his scythe at Ragnar. The werewolf tried catching it, but the weapon dropped both his arms to the ground. Ragnar grunted.
By the gods, how heavy is this thing?
Not much. Somewhere between 200 kgs if I'm not mistaken. Perfectly balanced though.
The werewolf tried picking up the scythe using all of his strength that made his feet dig into the ground.
You need to practice with it. We're going to leave soon. For now, I am starving. Oh, my back. I feel for pizza, you know. Like chicken with mozzarella cheese. That would hit the spot. Would you like some?
I am lactose intolerant.
Well, that sounds like a you problem. I will find something.
Death walked away, but when he turned around, he saw Ragnar wielding the scythe. In such a short space of time, the White Wolf would not be the only human, but the only other supernatural being to carry the Reaper's weapon. Ragnar Liefsson was truly a specimen to behold, using the weapon as he would his two-handed sword or spear. He moved fluidly, practicing swipes and strikes like he had the scythe his entire life. Death whispered under his breath,
"The warrior-knight-turned-werewolf. Now I can see why my siblings were interested in you. Don't worry, Ragnar. In this timeline, you and I will win."
The White Wolf walked around the city of Arkborn, the hideout belonging to Conquest. The difference between the populations was night and day. The rich folk in their fancy medieval homes arrogant as ever, wasting food and enjoying the sinful temptations Conquest offered them, whereas the villagers had folk roughing through garbage bins to find a piece of bread just to subside their rumbling, hungry bellies. The werewolf, while walking towards a quiet rural village at night, looked towards the Grim Reaper.
"How do we find this monster that you speak of?"
The Grim walked towards a wooden notice board at the entrance of Oxdrift village. He saw a flyer made with parchment paper, removed it from the board, then showed it to Ragnar and said, "I'm sure it won't be that difficult." The notice said, "The beast of Burdock Mountain strikes again." When morning arrived, Ragnar was hasteful in his movement to find out what the villagers saw or experienced last night. Death, however, stopped him.
"Where do you think you're going, werewolf?"
"I'm going to question the villagers and find out where the beast is, of course."
"And how would that work? Walk into the village and be like,
"Oh, excuse me, could you tell me where I can find the beast of Burdock Mountain?"
while your red eyes burn a hole through their soul?
I do not sound like that.
Sure you don't.
The handle of the scythe tapped the shoulder of the White Wolf as he gradually changed into a human again. While this had happened before, Ragnar was taken aback by the process. He had been a werewolf for so long that he felt emotional whenever he saw his human skin. Death donned him in village warrior clothing, making it seem like a stranger wandering by. He also gave him gold coins for food and beverages, but warned him not to spend all of it. Ragnar, in his human giant warrior form, asked the Reaper what disguise was he going to use. Death, however, had no plan of changing his appearance. He said, "I cannot be seen in that village. Last night was quiet, no one in sight, and I went unnoticed. But if my brother catches even a glimpse of me, this mission fails before we even begin. You search for the beast and I look for conquest. However, the further I venture away, the werewolf will start to take over. When you feel an itch on your skin, that means my power is fading. Make sure no one sees you as a werewolf, Ragnar. Conquest will smell you a mile away." The Reaper then spun aside and disappeared. The warrior knight walked into the village of Oxdrift. He saw the village folk sobbing while the others stood there frozen in shock. Ragnar then noticed large and heavy footprints on the ground. This monster only had 4 toes. When he knelt down, he noticed there were thin strands of dark fur in them. Ragnar picked it up to his nose and snuffed. Sulfur. The heaviness of the sorrowful air loomed in the village, so strong that Ragnar felt its pressure pressing down on his shoulders. These folk were suffering with torment and grief. Then the villagers spotted him standing around and staring at them. They stood in awe seeing a man so large, blonde hair into a ponytail and the village warrior clothing, unable to hide his muscles. Ragnar expected hostility. He expected these villagers to lash out at him from a foreigner wandering around in their home. Instead, despite the circumstances, he was met with warmth. There was an elderly woman that approached him and spoke kindly. She knew instantly that he wasn't from around here, though she never pried, rather pointed him towards the small wooden inn down the village. However, the woman did mention they never had much, certainly not a sufficient meal to fill a warrior so large, but she insisted the innkeeper would make something nevertheless. The old woman smiled warmly at Ragnar, then took her leave. He walked towards the Oxdrift Inn, opened the wooden door, and made his way to the counter. He was welcomed by an old black balding man with a long white beard. Ragnar looked at the man's clothes and knew just how much the village struggled. "Welcome, welcome, stranger. Forgive my tone of sadness," he said. "We've had a rough night, but what will you be having today?" Ragnar Liefsson was going to say nothing for now until he felt the gold coins in his pocket. He remembered the Reaper telling him not to spend too much of it. However, Ragnar saw that as an annoying little prick. He placed 4 gold coins onto the wooden countertop as the old man's eyes lit up with surprise. "No thank you, kind man, you save your food for your village. However, my payment is for information instead." There was a flyer up on the notice board, "The Beast of Burdock Mountain. What can you tell me about this creature?" The old man kept the white napkin he used to wipe the countertop over his shoulder. He held onto the gold coins like it meant the world to him. His eyes filled with tears followed by snuffles, then placed the coins into his pocket like they were fragile. At that moment, the guards walked in. 4 men in strange armor that carried heavy weapons in their arms. Their foul stench of evil and malice could be smelled a mile away. They stole the beverages from the tables of existing customers, drank half, then threw the rest on the floor. They grabbed the food from the people enjoying a small yet good meal, then tossed it in the bin. The guards ignored Ragnar, walked towards the counter and slammed their hands against the wooden top. "Payment, you fool," they said. "Don't you know that you should have it ready? You either pay up or surrender the witch. We know she's hiding here. You can smell the poverty." Since the village harbored special people like mages, they had to pay tariffs to live there. The guards collected payment every week from the village of Oxdrift. Since mages were also burned at the stake, the guards exploited this by extortion. The old man said, "But we just paid yesterday." His voice sounded defeated and filled with desperation. Then reluctantly, he reached for the gold coin inside his pocket. Ragnar Liefsson jumped down from the wooden bar stool at the counter. He stood tall and strong, looking down on the guards and said, "No payment today." The captain guard responded, "And who is this oaf?" Be warned, stranger, we do not ask you for your permit. Mind your own Ragnar grabbed the guard behind the neck and slammed his head onto the countertop. The impact was so hard the guard's nose buried inside his face. Just as the other guards could swing their heavy weapons, Ragnar moved like a shadow, snapping their necks despite their armor trying to protect them. He would have used their own weapons and sliced them apart from knowing the weak points in every armor that existed. But why dirty the innkeeper's wooden floor with blood? Just as they fell to the ground, Ragnar sat back on his wooden bar stool. Silence filled the inn while the villagers didn't move. Faint whispers began swarming in. How the hell did he do that? Did you even see him move from his chair? He broke their necks. He broke their damn necks. Remarks of disbelief. Ragnar took out all the gold coins and gave it to the innkeeper, then told him to cook meals for the customers that had their food stolen. Son, the old man said, while I am grateful for what you have done, they will send more. They always do. Soon they will take our homes for refuge, they say. Yet their castles are allocated for punishing those who are different to them. Ragnar then replied, no one will be taking your homes anymore. The city will soon be free of conquest. However, are you able to cook and talk at the same time? The old innkeeper gave a vague nod to Ragnar. Good. Now tell me everything that you all know about the beast of Burdock Mountain. Death had entered Purgatory, a dark, barren realm that lacked any color or vibrancy. There was thick smog that hovered over the place from burning fires and ash, with a foul stench that traveled in the cold and ominous breeze. Sounds echoed throughout the place. Roars, hisses, grunts, and heavy, thunderous footsteps from creatures that were taller than the trees. While seldomly would there be a few innocent souls trapped in this place, it was mostly occupied by the foulest of monsters and people that were kept around by angels for further use. If death had a say in natural law, then purgatory would not exist. However, as much as the Reaper may outrank almost all beings in strength, natural law was not something created by the riders of the apocalypse, therefore his interference would be catastrophic. When the souls of good people were trapped in purgatory from foul play by angels and demons, they were devoured within a few seconds. However, with that being said, and with the exception of his siblings, no person, monster, angel, or demon would ever be foolish enough to anger Death himself. As the Grim Reaper walked through whistling, every evil being in purgatory bowed their heads while looking at the ground. But there were some monsters that picked their heads up and took a glimpse of Death. Maybe this was bravery or sheer stupidity, but the Reaper stopped whistling abruptly.
If any one of you look at me again, I will dig out your eyeballs and feed it to you. Do we understand each other?
The monsters bowed down even lower, but no words were spoken from them. No sounds were made or heard. Most of them were even scared to breathe. Death continued his whistling while traveling the path. Then he reached a telephone booth inside a dark, weird-looking building. Death grabbed the receiver of an old winding telephone while humming "This Old Man," then winded back the numbers and waited. A warm, gentle voice had answered from the receiver.
Good day, you're speaking to Avery. Which demon would you like me to exorcise today? Oh, and we also have a sale on possession books.
Miss Avery was a demon, but she was a good demon. The same manner in which angels turned heel towards the human race, Miss Avery turned good. Though her appearance of a slender woman wearing a red dress, which matched the horns that stuck out on either side of her head, and her beady yellow eyes never really helped her case. Miss Avery ran an antique bookshop, the same job she had before she died, while solving possession cases on the side.
Death, it's been a while since I've heard from you, but why use this line? You do know this line is for possession cases only, right?
Yes, ma'am, but I want to know whether I would be able to defeat Leviathan, meaning would my scythe kill him?
The beast of Burdock Mountain? Only you and your siblings can see him, but no, you cannot kill him. Your punches won't do damage on him, and vice versa. Literally anyone else could if they were strong enough, but one cannot hit what they cannot see. Conquest designed the beast like that. It would be too easy if you could. Though, there was a rumor about the beast. How true it is yet to be tested. Some say that once contact is made with the monster, its form will appear in front of whoever is making physical contact with it.
And that's what I feared, hence I used this line. This fight isn't something I can base off a rumor. Which brings me to my next question. Would I be able to possess someone?
What? No way. That's not possible. Firstly, the victim will die immediately. Secondly, their soul gets disfigured permanently. And thirdly, heaven nor hell would take them.
Okay, but what if I could possess someone that could heal the damage inflicted upon him?
Holy crap. You found Ragnar.
Avery, would that be possible?
I guess so. But he will not walk out unscathed. He may lose a portion of his memory. Or, worst case scenario, the werewolf would become rabid. You would be locked in there irrespective of how strong you actually are.
Alright, how do I prevent that?
I don't know. This is way above my pay grade. I guess, ask Ragnar to think about his happiest memory before the possession. Also, have a keyword. When you need to exit the body, utter the keyword that would trigger that same happy memory.
Thank you, Avery. I owe you one. Death hung up, then placed the receiver back onto the telephone. He had no doubts the werewolf would be fine on his own. After all, Ragnar the warrior knight worked for towns and villages doing the exact same thing. He knew the white wolf would find out everything there was to know about the beast of Burdock Mountain. However, that wasn't the issue. The concern was fighting the beast. The Reaper would have to be Ragnar's eyes throughout the entire fight, and while that may work against an ordinary monster, Leviathan was anything but. One wrong tell from death and Ragnar could die. However, the white wolf was also no ordinary warrior. He was the most feared werewolf in both worlds, human and supernatural. The Grum would have to trust that Ragnar would be able to defeat the beast of Burdock Mountain without him possessing the werewolf. However, if all else fails, Leviathan will certainly be destroyed, but Ragnar might not be the same after possession. Though what the Grum asked of Avery was still handy information nonetheless. Later down the line, there was no way Ragnar was going to defeat war by his lonesome. How could he, when the Reaper himself feared his brother? The white wolf and death becoming one was going to happen eventually. Nevertheless, Death spun his side and ended up back in Arkborn. He found a concealed spot in the woods, hiding from any human that might expose his whereabouts to conquest. The only thing that was left to do was wait for the white wolf, hoping that he had something to go on. The information received from the villagers of Oxdrift all matched together. They said the beast was invisible, it moved like the wind, it had a deep roar and a menacing growl, and it only showed up at night. That wasn't really much to go on. However, there was an Indian woman named Lenore that came out of one of the houses. She wore a dark blue and black hooded cloak with scars all over her face. Despite her being a witch using similar remedies and ointments like Myra, her wounds were still fresh. Lenore told Ragnar a similar story with one major difference. She claimed to have seen the monster in the flesh. This caused murmurs in the village, since some of them never believed her. They said Lenore was nowhere to be seen in the village last night. The witch then showed a nasty wound from the top of her skull all the way down to her spine. She showed the wound to Ragnar and asked him if any human would cause such a painful scar just to stand out. The warrior knight never comforted Lenore. Witches could be good or bad, but Ragnar stayed far away from witchcraft. But still he listened to her story. Last night when the beast entered Oxdrift, it dragged out villagers from their homes. She said she felt helpless, witnessing the supernatural invisible entity devouring her people. Lenore also claimed that her magic never worked on the beast. She grabbed a spear, then ran towards the monster, swinging blindly.
When the monster grabbed her by the neck, Lenore grabbed onto whatever she could. Once physical contact was made, the beast appeared in the flesh. She said the creature was a dark giant with gnarly fangs, blood-red eyes and antlers on the top of its head. She said there were spikes on the body, but she wasn't sure whether those were horns. Something was really strange about Lenore. Why would the beast of Burdock Mountain spare her? Not that her story was unbelievable, but her energy just felt off. Ragnar could not quite figure out what it was. Then the dark clouds gathered over the village, looking daunting as ever. The entrance had a wooden gate about 1.5 meters high that began opening itself. While Ragnar couldn't see anything untoward, he felt an ominous presence. He felt this pressure surrounding his body. The aura was a familiar one, this feeling of a fight in which his victory was doubtful. He heard the grunts, growls and hisses. He heard the ominous roar shaking the homes and rattling the windows in the village. The beast of Burdock Mountain was in the village of Oxdrift, but Ragnar couldn't see him. Leviathan, larger than ever, walked slowly. His antlers seemed wider and more curved than its usual self. Its eyes were glowing red and drool dripped from its mouth onto the ground, noticed by the warrior knight. Leviathan had its eyes fixed on Ragnar. No matter how or where it walked, its eyes never left the warrior knight. Maybe this was a way of sizing up a formidable opponent. Or maybe the werewolf and the reaper approached us the wrong way. Conquest knew his brother better than anyone. He knew that a village with helpless people suffering and facing injustice would be perfect bait. The werewolf and the reaper were never hunting Leviathan. Leviathan was hunting them. Ragnar took charge and ushered the village folk inside the church building behind Oxdrift. He knew making them seek refuge in their homes was too risky. Ragnar would rather have them in one place, knowing he wouldn't have to move house to house saving people. However, among the crowd, Lenore was nowhere to be seen. Ragnar asked the villagers if they had any weapons. No, they said this was always a peaceful community. Never were there weapons laying around. Ragnar closed his eyes and then the church door. He walked towards the middle of the village, unable to see who or what he was fighting. With his right foot, he draws a line on the ground just in front of the church building. Ragnar remained calm. His nerves were easing themselves and his breaths were no more frantic or heavy. He stands strong behind the line, taking his battle stance, ready to fight until his last breath. However, Leviathan was standing right next to him. Death heard a vicious roar echoing from the village, and that wasn't Ragnar. What was the point of now not wanting to be seen when the beast found Ragnar? Death moved like shadowy smoke towards the village with haste. The Reaper knew that if Leviathan was in the village, then Conquest was near. However, what if Conquest had been in the village all along? The beast of Burdock Mountain scratched a sharp claw against a rock near straw and hay. The spark ignited and the fire spread rapidly, burning down the homes in the village of Oxdrift. Leviathan was strategic in targeting the houses. One might think that a monster of this magnitude, so foul and ferocious, might not be intelligent, rather trained to cause chaos, but not Leviathan. Every flame that ignited drew Ragnar's attention, and that's when the beast attacked him. Moving lightning quick like Fesliyan the vampire cop, with swipes and strikes as strong as Monrog the hellhound. These attacks were coming in from all directions. The warrior knight became a pinball, flying through wooden houses and suffering wounds that were becoming too much to bear. Last time that someone tossed him around like this was the crown, when he was much younger. And still, he crawled his way back behind the line, making sure Leviathan does not enter the church building. Each time the beast took out chunks of Ragnar's chest, right up until the point that he coughed out blood. The antlers pierced Ragnar's stomach as he was suspended in the air, then slammed to the ground. The gashes were getting deeper and the wounds became more painful. The village folk behind Ragnar, hiding in the church building, trembled with fear. Ragnar, however, kept his calm. He kept his eyes closed. He waited for a technique that he gained from his warrior life. A technique that made Ragnar look like a superhuman, when in fact it was years and years of battle experience. Tachypsychia, also known as the time dilation effect or altered time perception, was a psychological phenomenon characterized by the subjective experience of time slowing down or speeding up during highly stressful situations. Whether a foe outranked or outmatched him, Ragnar's heightened senses of knowing when an attack will come before it was even made him a force to be reckoned with. Death reached the village and the folk hiding in the church gasped in horror. They whispered under their breath with fear, all thinking the same thing. Why did he look similar to Conquest? The Reaper saw Leviathan circling Ragnar. Just as he was about to shout out navigational maneuvers, then turn Ragnar back into a werewolf, the warrior stopped him by raising out his hand. He whispered, but Death heard it. He said not yet. For the first time, the Grim Reaper was unsure of what to do. Should he possess Ragnar? But where was the time to explain the process? How could Ragnar possibly find a happy memory in a time like this? More importantly, will the warrior knight even let the Grim Reaper possess him? However, in a shocking turn of events, the battle had taken a drastic turn. The beast of Burdock Mountain had planned his finishing blow. He planned a deep gash to the neck, slicing the carotid arteries, cutting off blood supply to the brain, face and neck. But when the monster dashed forward, just a few inches away from Ragnar, the warrior with his body facing forward had opened his eyes, reached his hand out towards the side and stopped the beast by grabbing its neck. Ragnar then gave a nod to the Reaper. Once physical contact was made, the beast of Burdock Mountain began appearing in the flesh. The monster struggled to break the grip. However, as the beast may have gradually changed in appearance, so did Ragnar. The Grum pointed his scythe and uttered an incantation, changing the warrior back into his werewolf form. The monstrous, tall, muscular, giant white wolf with glowing red eyes was now facing the beast of Burdock Mountain. Ragnar the werewolf had punched the beast so hard it made a hole through its stomach. He then slammed Leviathan to the ground, placing one foot on its chest while ripping out the antlers from its head. Then behind him, an army of guards Ragnar fought earlier surrounded Oxdrift. At least 1,000 strong men with heavy weapons stormed the village to seek refuge. Death, however, stood between the army and Ragnar. He intertwined his fingers, then pushed his palms out away from his body. He sighed while stretching, then said, "Now this would be a really good warm-up." The white wolf continued beating up Leviathan, not realizing Death had already killed 500 guards. Ragnar's side eye caught a glimpse of how the Reaper moved. Now whether this was fear or admiration, the werewolf could not deny the Grim Reaper was on a different level altogether. Ragnar then snapped the antlers in half and ripped out the spine of the beast and threw it on the ground, whereas the Reaper sat over the bodies of the guards he had just slaughtered. He looked at Ragnar and said, "What took you so long?" The villagers were cautious to approach the werewolf when they walked out the church. They saw the wounds inflicted earlier were now healing. Ragnar told them not to be afraid. The Reaper and himself were there to help them. While the white wolf helped the villagers douse the fires with buckets of water, Death could not help but feel an ominous presence lurking nearby. And then, when victory seemed certain, all hell broke loose. Death fell to his knees as Ragnar stood frozen. There was a long blue whip with sharp hooks at the front that wrapped around the Reaper's head. The hooks had pierced his skull and the rope had constantly been tugged on, impaling his head deeper and deeper. Conquest, the youngest rider of the apocalypse, emerged from the shadows holding the other end of the whip in his right arm. Death grunted and tried taking out the hooks from his brain. He wasn't sarcastic or snarky anymore. This time he panicked. He told Ragnar in a grunting voice to get the villagers and himself out of there immediately. In agonizing psychological torture, the groom clawed at his own face. Then he turned to Ragnar and said,
If I fall, use the name of my forest, Seraphine. Do not forget that name, Seraphine. Now get the hell out of here.
Conquest stood arrogant, wrapping the rope around his hand for further grip strength. With his long blue and black mysterious hooded cloak and evil pale face, he says,
Change of plan, brother. Why would I use a werewolf at my disposal when I can have the almighty Death himself? Now, brother, let's dig deep into that childhood of yours and see how much more of a monster I can make you.
The white wolf stood strong, holding the scythe in his hand. His red eyes glowed in the thick fog surrounding the village. Ragnar Liefsson made sure the Grim Reaper did not harm the innocent people relocating to safety. He watches Death grinding his teeth, punching the ground on his knees, struggling to fight the hold Conquest has on him. When the Reaper looked around, he closed his eyes and vanished into a wisp of dark smoke, moving like the wind, never to be seen again. Conquest, in his blue cloak and eerie pale face, was confused. He knew his brother was strong, but to be able to fight the mind games cast by the king of manipulators was truly a remarkable feat. He looked at Ragnar in fear, witnessing the monstrous werewolf wielding the Reaper's scythe, a weapon that weighed so much that it was only possible for his brother to use it. The werewolf, with all his might, throws the scythe like it was an axe. Conquest watched the steel blade swirling in the wind, slicing the air. But just before contact was made, though barely with a cut on his shoulder, he too vanishes into a wisp of blue smoke, disappearing behind the fog, fleeing like a coward. Ragnar was alone in the village, fearful of what was going to happen. He had a read on people, therefore he knew Conquest wouldn't be able to harm him, not in this timeline at least. So what does he do? Should he follow the scent of Conquest and slay the rider once and for all, risking time being wasted, not knowing if the Reaper would turn evil and massacre every single being, human and supernatural? Or does he try and remove the curse from the Grim, and both of them pursue Conquest? Seraphine, he whispers. What did that name mean and who did it belong to? He knew the Grim's forest was named Seraphine, but why would the Reaper utter a random woman's name before his mind got warped by Conquest's power? Seraphine. Ragnar walked towards the scythe, picked it up and looked at the weapon carefully. Why didn't the Grim tell him more? Why didn't he give Ragnar the solution? But when the werewolf tightened his grip on the handle, he thought maybe the solution was in his hand. Maybe Death left his scythe behind for a reason. The werewolf spun the scythe, remembering the same way the Reaper had done. A sphere opened up with a wavy border and white noise buzzing through. Ragnar sees a place, dark, gloomy and barren inside the portal. This was Purgatory, the last place the Reaper had visited. The white wolf followed the dark path of the gloomy, barren land, witnessing creatures of all sorts crawl their way out of the shadows, stalking him. From monsters larger than trees and buildings to creatures small and foul, they all wanted a piece of Ragnar Liefsson. Then a distant figure wearing a dark cloak like Death walked towards the werewolf. His gait was slow, lifeless almost, but full with a troublesome level of power. The cloak was unable to hide his large muscular build, nor could the hood mask the scars on his face or glass eye. This being was known as Taker, and while he appeared to be a human, his aura displayed anything but. He pressed his forefinger against his middle finger, then held up his hand. The monster saw Taker's fingers as a terrifying weapon of mass destruction, while Ragnar held a scythe, ready to fight. When Taker snapped his fingers, the heads of the monsters surrounding the werewolf exploded like pumpkins all at the same time. Ragnar stood baffled. Who the hell was this guy? Then Taker, in his warm, polite, kind mannerisms, bowed his head in respect. His voice was low, soft and slow, yet warm and comforting. "The White Wolf," he said. "I've heard many stories about you, and from what I am seeing, it doesn't do justice. I am Taker, Dad's apprentice. Forgive the torment and unwelcoming nature of this place. The monsters were foolish not to see you carrying the Reaper's weapon. Nevertheless, welcome to Purgatory." Ragnar Liefsson spoke to Taker as they traveled the path of his home. The apprentice oversees Purgatory by keeping the veil between heaven and hell in order, waiting for the day this foul place would be destroyed once and for all. However, when the werewolf mentioned the name Seraphine, Taker's eyes glistened with worry. "Follow me," he says, leading Ragnar into the largest dungeon filled with artifacts. "That means Dagon is in trouble." "Not good," he said. Ragnar frowned. "Who's Dagon?" "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. The riders of the apocalypse are known by their real names in the afterlife. So conquest is Caecilius, death is Dagon, famine is Pharaoh, and war is Wilbert. Which means if that mentions Seraphine to you, the situation really must be dire." The werewolf explained how conquest corrupted the mind of Death instead of himself. The Reaper vanished into a wisp of dark smoke, leaving Ragnar clueless on how to use the name. Then Taker handed the werewolf an old locket. It felt heavy, filled with pain and sadness. The locket was so tiny in the hand of Ragnar, and yet it felt heavier than the scythe itself. This was gifted to the Reaper by Seraphine. Taker looked at the scythe being held by Ragnar, then pointed towards it. He said, "It's more than just being strong, you know. Yeah, strength has a major factor in wielding the scythe, but if one has witnessed something tragic in their life, something that caused them great pain, then it makes it easier to carry. I would know since I helped the Reaper forge it." He carved symbols onto the scythe handle, then told Ragnar that when he spun it again, it would take him into the forest of Seraphine. He knew death better than anyone, and to avoid a massacre, the Reaper would hide in that forest for as long as he possibly could, before his mind was fully lost. The locket was given to the werewolf, and Taker told him that he would have to last 60 seconds against the Reaper. Now this never seemed like a really long time, but 60 seconds against Death himself, without the Reaper holding back, was suicide. Ragnar would have to wait until Taker could summon Seraphine's soul into the locket. That would be the only way for Death to snap back to reality and remove the invisible poisonous warp wrapped around his brain. With Ragnar making his way out of Purgatory, he looked at the locket, then back at Taker. He wondered why a simple locket would be the key in bringing Death back. He asks,
"What makes this locket so special?"
Then Taker replies, "Well, this was the only gift Death received in his entire life. This locket belonged to her. Seraphine was his mother." The Grim Reaper had been collecting souls since he was a mere child. Most people saw Death as an ominous being because of his presence and aura, that darkness and heavy energy emitting from his body whenever he showed up. No one realized this darkness was caused by the souls he carried and not because of evil connotations. More importantly, of all the riders of the apocalypse, Death was not only the most misunderstood, but the most hated, all for doing his job. This life was something that he never wanted. The pain that he felt with every soul he took numbed his heart. He watched families crying over their deceased loved ones on hospital beds. He witnessed children being taken from this earth from sicknesses and natural ailments, pleading with him to give them more time. He saw the elderly wishing they made more of their life before he carried them away. Order and stability were important in the afterlife. Death made sure of it, to avoid innocent people suffering in hell. As he got older, he became cold-hearted. With every soul that he took, his handsome, dashing appearance was removed by the flesh from his body. His gray eyes shining in the night dimmed right down to hollow eye sockets, filled with emptiness. Death was left with an ugly, skeleton-like appearance that he covered up with a dark black hooded cloak. He became the one who never spoke. Despite loving nature, he had to endure the trees and plants dying whenever he passed through. Similar to autumn, the colorful foliage and the cycle of life comes to an end. Death, in some cases, was rather a beautiful escape. It was one thing for a human to have the werewolf curse like Ragnar and Victor, but this was a curse far more heavier than people could fathom. Though, even with his heart turned into stone, he would get into trouble for giving people extra years of their life, which in turn created rifts in the timeline. However, the Grim Reaper did find a way out. He made a deal with his siblings that if he collected souls from other timelines simultaneously, then he could cash in his receipt and leave the supernatural world once and for all, having Taker fill in as the new Grim Reaper. It was an impossible task. Traveling through timelines in such a short space of time would have ripped him apart. But it was a sacrifice that he was willing to make, not for himself, but for a woman named Seraphine. For years, the Grim had been sneaking out into the human world, watching a woman from afar, guiding her but trying his best not to alter the timeline by meeting her. This was no ordinary woman. This was Seraphine, who had forsaken her life of riches in the castle and searched for her beloved boy in her beggar life. He knew Rumpelstiltskin snatched him away from his mother at birth. He knew the woman had no choice but still chose to defy the imp all for her boy. The Grim wanted nothing more but to rescue her from this heartache of a lost cause journey and make himself known to her. He wanted her to know that she wouldn't be alone anymore. Therefore, Death sacrificed his body and soul and collected more souls than anyone could fathom. From timeline to timeline in his silent, cold-hearted nature, focusing on his goal and fighting against supernatural beings along the way, he had fulfilled his task. But he was too late. When Death returned to Purgatory smiling after a really long time, his heart felt lifelike again. But then his glistening eyes drooped with concern. He saw Avery and Taker waiting to meet him with expressions of defeat and heartache. Avery had burst into tears, completely inconsolable, whereas Taker put his head down trying to find the right words. With his quaky voice he told Death, "I'm so sorry, mate. I'm so sorry." Death looked at Avery confused, then at Taker. "Sorry for what? What's going on here?" Taker says, "There's one more soul that popped up now. The last soul that needs to be cashed in for your check. I am so sorry, sir, but it is your mom." The Grim stood frozen, having no feeling in his entire body. And then he says in complete denial, "No, it can't be. There's some mistake. The system of the afterlife isn't always accurate. There must be some mistake." Avery ran towards Death and embraced him with all her might. She held on to the Grim, sobbing in his chest, but he never hugged her back. He was processing everything that happened. He stands there like a disappointed innocent child that had his favorite toy snatched away from him. He looks around him as the tears pour out of the hollow eye sockets. "But I completed my mission.
I have done everything that was required of me. There is some mistake. I know that my mom is waiting for me.
Taker kept his head down, staring at the ground, hiding his own tears. He never had the words to comfort Dagon. There was a long moment before Death composed himself, then disappeared into a wisp of dark smoke. When someone dies, their soul travels to a place very special to them before the Reaper takes them away. He entered a beautiful forest that had an elderly woman sitting on a log, singing "This old man, he played one. He played knick-knack on my thumb." When Seraphine was expecting Dagon, she would stroll in a forest similar to this one, humming that tune to him. The groom was afraid of showing his face to her. He was petrified that his own mother might be frightened of him. Seraphine, however, knew he was standing there. She says,
"Why do you hide in the shadows, dear messenger? I know you are here to take me away."
Dad tried his best to hide his pain and tears.
Ma'am, I am here to take you to heaven.
Heaven? And why would I go to heaven when I abandoned my child?
No, ma'am, you didn't abandon him. He was taken from you. If only you lived in the castle and enjoyed your life of riches, you would have lived longer.
Oh no, dear messenger. What was the point of living longer if my son wasn't with me?
She stares at the Grim Reaper longer than usual. Would you grant me one wish, she asks of him. Death made himself look smaller and humble, then hurried towards the woman by gently holding her hand and says, "Yes, anything." She says,
"I don't know why, but you remind me of my son. And I've been searching for him for so long that every young man I meet had some resemblance to my Dagon. But you, there's something different about you. Would you call me Mama as long as we stroll into the afterlife?"
Death hid his pain. His heart broke into a million pieces and the tears were being restrained to not flood his face. "Yes, Mama," he said. "I will gladly do so."
This must not be easy for you, having to escort so many souls into the afterlife. It must be a heavy burden on your shoulders.
"Yes, Mama, but I try."
And try you must, but your heart is consumed by pain. You hide too much, my dear boy. There's so much of sorrow. Laugh, make jokes, be merry. Let your demeanor be positive and help those around you, and in doing so your own heart would heal.
"Yes, Mama." This time his voice was shaky, trying to keep it together. After a long gentle stroll into the forest, Seraphine's soul began illuminating a whitish-blue color. Her energy felt warm and radiant as she looks up into the sky. Death smiled at her and said, "Now, Mama, do not be afraid. I am sending you to one of the best angels that I know, an angel that is not corrupted in any shape or form. She will take care of you and you will live through all of eternity being the happiest you have ever felt."
The happiest I have ever felt? Would that mean you would be joining me, Dagon?
Death's eyes widened as tears rolled down his face. Seraphine knew who he was all along. Despite the skeletal body, despite the hollow eye sockets and eerie eyes, despite the dark hooded cloak trying to hide him away, she knew. A mother always knows. The groom held her tightly in his arms, smiling with tears rolling down his face. He said, "Yes, Mama, I will be joining you shortly. I have some work to take care of first." Seraphine removed a locket from her pocket, one that was handmade, old, and scented with her perfume. This was a gift that she made for Dagon before he was even born. When Death accepted the locket, he felt his entire soul changing. He felt the weight on his shoulders gradually decreasing and breathing became easier. He held onto the locket like he was holding his life in his hands. And as Seraphine's soul-like body gently travels up into the beautiful baby blue sky, Dagon saw large feathery wings waiting at the top to welcome her. That smile never left the Grim Reaper's face. He remembered his mother's words carefully. Smile, laugh, make jokes, and be merry. And so he laughed until his heart felt content. He laughed until all the pain drained out of his body. He laughed until his voice had echoed through every timeline. Although there was more to Seraphine's death, the Groom thought it was natural causes because of her old age. However, when he found out what really happened to her, the Grim Reaper's new mission of revenge began. Conquest, famine, and war had killed Seraphine, knowing death would not have any reason to leave the supernatural world. They knew he wanted to forsake this life and live with his real mother. His receipt of getting out of this job would now be null and void. Little did they know Death had come to know about their schemes and betrayal. His scythe was the only weapon in existence that could kill the riders of the apocalypse. But how cruel was his life that he could not be the one to do so? Such were the rules of the supernatural world. For that, he needed a werewolf that was not supposed to be born. He needed a monster that was linked to him by fate. He needed Ragnar Liefsson, the White Wolf. The werewolf walked into the forest of Seraphine, but it looked different. It was dark, frightening, and the energy was evil. The White Wolf's red eyes searched for the Reaper behind every shadow cast upon the moonlight. But his search was cut short when the groom stepped forward. His eyes glowed a fiercer red and his appearance was terrifying, so much so that Ragnar felt nervous. He saw the Reaper's evil smile from ear to ear while he cracked his knuckles. Now he was fully overtaken by the curse of conquest. 60 seconds. 60 seconds was all Ragnar had to hold off the groom. If Taker was a second late, the White Wolf will surely die. After all, this was a version of the Reaper that wasn't going to hold back. Ragnar tightly held onto the locket in his fist. He would need to wait for it to vibrate and feel the spark shooting out. For now, he took a deep breath in, calmed his nerves, and charged forward. There was a rule in battle: always be first. Death moved so quickly that all the werewolf could see was smoke traveling in the wind. With each blow landed, chunks of the werewolf's flesh were being removed. Ragnar became a pinball, trying to follow the Reaper's movements. Fesliyan the vampire cop was indeed quick, but this speed was on a whole new level. When time reached the 30-second mark, the fight had shifted. While the werewolf never landed a solid blow, neither did the Reaper. Ragnar could now read his moves and anticipate which angles the punches were coming from, then dodging them a split second before it landed. Death created a mirage of himself and snuck behind Ragnar, slicing the werewolf's back with his sharp skeleton fingers. The wound was so deep and large the White Wolf could feel the two halves of his back struggling to stay together. But he turned around, making it seem like he was going to zig rather than zag, and punched Death in his stomach. The Reaper's skeleton ribs broke off the ribcage and flew in the air, which halted the fight. Ragnar fell onto the ground as the stones and mud crawled into the wound. The Reaper held his stomach, but his eyes had flames burning through. Now he was angrier than before, driven by a blinding rage poisoning his mind. This was the moment the werewolf had waited for. Now was the time to use the scythe. Ragnar was fearful that if he used the weapon earlier, Death would read his moves or worse, disarm him and take the weapon back. However, the White Wolf's fear was very much alive when Death held his hand out and the scythe flew into his palm like his hand was a vacuum. Now there were 20 seconds remaining. Ragnar grunted and got up to his feet, hiding the immense pain that he felt. The wound was healing thanks to the werewolf immune system, but it wasn't quick enough. The groom dashed forward, swinging his scythe with one arm, and that was his mistake. He should have used his own limbs since those had his power coursing through, not the weapon itself. The werewolf grabbed the scythe, disarmed the groom, and elbowed his face so hard a small chunk of his jaw cracked and crumbled, pushing him back. This made the Reaper furious. He grunted and roared at Ragnar louder than any monster could ever roar. But then, the locket began vibrating. 60 seconds on the dot. The groom had looked at the locket and calmed his entire body. He had recognized it immediately. White orbs, pure and serene, had flown out of the locket and manifested itself in the dark forest. Seraphine in her spirit form stood in front of that, with the biggest, kindest smile that she could muster. "My dear boy," she tells him, "you are stronger than this. You can break free." The darkness of the forest fell away while Ragnar stumbled to his feet. The menacing and frightening appearance of death left his body like a graceful cleansing. The soul of Seraphine slowly evaporated, but her smile lingered long enough to snap the groom out of the curse. The white wolf breathed heavy, grunting in pain. The wounds took long to heal, and all he could think about was how thankful he was for Taker to come through. If Death's apprentice was a second late, Ragnar feared he would have died. Death looked at the werewolf, ashamed and disappointed in himself. "I'm so sorry," he said. Ragnar interrupted.
There's no time for that. We need to find Conquest, and quickly.
Right, yeah, Death said. "He doesn't know that you broke me free from his mind games. We use that to our advantage. Here, take my scythe, and I'll make sure that he doesn't escape this time."
Few hours passed and the Grim Reaper walked into the city in ruin. This was identical to the visions he showed Ragnar before. Houses burning, buildings destroyed, and rubble filling the space on the ground. Conquest walked by, holding his shoulder from when Ragnar hurt him with the scythe. He paced around like he was waiting for death all along. When he saw the Grim Reaper walking towards him, that evil grin stretched his jaw.
"Come, brother,"
he said.
"I've been waiting for you. What took you so long?"
The Reaper bowed in front of Conquest while the werewolf was nowhere to be seen. He said,
"I have killed Ragnar Liefsson. The werewolf will no longer serve as a threat. I serve Conquest, the king of manipulators."
Conquest walked towards the Reaper and placed his hand on his head, like one would pet an animal.
"Good.
Conquest said in an evil whisper.
The mighty Death fallen to his knees by a weakling like me."
When the Grim Reaper began laughing in a low tone, Conquest quickly removed his hand from the Reaper's head. Death said,
"You know, for someone that's so skilled in manipulating others' thoughts, you really don't have any of your own, do you?"
The Grim jumps up and punches a hole through the chest of Conquest. He lifts up the rider with one arm like Conquest weighed less than a feather. With blood dripping from his mouth, Conquest laughed in return. His voice was curdled and muffled, but he said, "Come on, brother. You know you cannot kill me."
"I know. I'm just keeping you in place."
Conquest widened his eyes in fear and tried vanishing into a wisp of smoke, but he couldn't. Death grabbed his spine and kept him from moving even an inch. Ragnar Liefsson, the monstrous werewolf with his terrifying aura, walked slowly and steadily towards Conquest. He carried the scythe like the weapon was his all along. He had a frightening smile widening his jaw with every stride that he took. Then, with a mighty swing, packed with so much of force and speed, the werewolf slices Conquest's head clean off. Death stomps on the head until nothing was left, then spits on the ground in anger. The ruined city of Arkborn began changing from its dirt and destruction to a beautiful and serene place. The Reaper looked at the werewolf and said,
"You could have walked away, you know. Why did you stay? You would have died if the fight went on a second longer."
You've never given up on me on the previous timelines, and I won't give up on you in this one. Besides, it was really fun hitting you in the face.
Death gave a warm smile filled with respect.
"Well, Conquest has fallen. One down, 2 more to go. Famine, my wretched sister.
We're coming for your head next." There was a village, small, dark, and cold. The snowstorm reduced visibility and food resources were at an all-time low. All the houses besides one were empty. If one would open the doors, they would find villagers frozen and starved to their death. Such were the harsh conditions of winter. However, it was going to get worse. In one central village house, some folk hid indoors starving, having pieces of bread and passing it around, knowing fully well that it would not subside their rumbling bellies much longer. The wood burned and crumbled into charcoal at the fireplace, while some of them sat closer to get warmer. The villagers looked at their pile of wood or lack thereof, then realized hunger was the least of their problems. This village would be the first in their timeline to witness the horrors that winter carried. They would be the first to encounter what lurks out there in the cold. Weak and afraid, they stared out the window, contemplating how to retrieve firewood and where to get food. Then, in the distance, they hear a horse neighing. An unusual neigh that sounded like the horse was dying, but if one listened closely, a foul voice was hidden underneath, whispering something foul and strange in the winter wind. An incantation, a ritual, perhaps a strange notion that felt like their doom. Their eyes moved left to right, searching for it, trying to follow the sound, but there it was, staring at them from the snow-covered woods nearby. A horse, darker than a shadow, slender with pieces of flesh removed from its body, wobbled and stumbled with every stride. Its tightly wrapped skin covered its prominent skeleton, and while the windows and doors were closed, the foul breath of this unusual animal crept its way into the house. However, what frightened them the most was its glowing green eyes piercing their soul and hypnotizing their mind. One of the villagers sitting by the fireplace yelled, "Get away from the window! Look not into its eyes." The villagers shut their eyes instantly, then jumped away, laying low beneath the window height, absolutely terrified. But one man remained watching, and not by his will. The green eyes from the horse spoke to him, convincing him to open the door. Then a plague-like mist traveled from the woods and crept inside the small gap of the window, making its way inside the man's mind. Like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings, the village man walked towards the cold wooden door and opened it slowly. A gush of snow blowing in the strong wind flew into the house, dousing the fire. The villagers inside yelled and shouted in frustration, "Close the door! What are you doing?" And yet the man ignored them. He stood by the door looking for the horse in the woods but saw nothing. He heard no neighs, no hooves moving in the snow. However, he did feel its foul breath against his neck. Despite others not being able to see it, the man now could. A tall, slender, decaying, and evil entity leaned against the front door, smiling at him. It was dark in color, just like the horse, with long needle-like teeth and antlers on its head. Its eye sockets were sunken in with glowing green eyeballs peeking through. The monster looked starved to such an extent that its flesh fell out of its body, like a clay sculpture breaking into pieces. Before the villager could even speak, this unusual entity of the macabre turned its body into smoke and shoved its way into the man's mouth. The villagers cornered themselves in the old home, witnessing their friend screaming in agony while his bones snapped and crackled. He fell to his knees, holding his stomach, muttering the same thing over and over again. "I'm so hungry. I'm just so hungry." His voice sounded different, like it was being shared with someone or something within. But when he picked his head up, he had glowing green eyes, just like the horse, and dark creature-like entity. His teeth were long, like needles, poking through his lips from not having enough space to fit in his mouth. He crawled on the wooden floor in an unnatural manner, as if there were no bones in his body. He made his way towards the people that he once knew but now never recognized. To him, they were his food. A few minutes, A few minutes of the most horrific sounds the village had ever heard. Flesh being chewed and ripped apart. Organs being squashed and skin being torn. The man possessed by this evil cannibalistic entity rampaged his way to stop his hunger, which seemed to increase the more he ate. All that remained were their teeth, hair, finger, and toenails. The possessed man stood frozen, unable to remember anything that just happened, right before his neck turns 180 degrees, snapping and killing him instantly. Footsteps were then heard outside. Gentle, slow, struggling steps like someone dragging their feet in the snow. A woman's whisper travels in the wind, uttering a language that was heard by no human before, yet well known to the entity. And so it walked out the wooden house, tall, slender, dark and decaying, with blood and flesh dripping from its sharp teeth. Its glowing green eyes began lighting up like a traffic light. The entity walked towards the woman donned in a dark green hooded cloak, like the monster was a moth, and she was the flame. The hood never revealed much, just a glimpse of a face with torn skin and bones and foul teeth and maggots. She grabbed the dark entity-like creature like she was going to kiss the monster. Her mouth remained slightly opened as the souls of those devoured a few minutes ago traveled in a green mist from the monster's mouth to hers. Suddenly, the woman's facial features changed from bones to pale skin, and her appearance, though mostly hidden, seemed rather beautiful. The creature turned back into the horse, starved and depleted of energy, barely able to maintain its balance. But still the horse leans back, outstretching its front legs, and bows to the mysterious woman, serving her no matter the circumstances. Its eyes were still green, but one could not be sure if it was from the reflection of its master. Famine mounted her peculiar ghostly horse, then rides off into the distance, leaving only a trail of laughter that would haunt the village for as long as it stood. The White Wolf and the Grim Reaper sat in a cozy tavern known as the Eerie Ember. Fitting for its name, the tavern was lit with dim candles, providing a warm ambient light for a cozy mood and time well spent. The wooden floors creaked as one walked, and the benches and tables were rustic to say the least. For someone with a good nose, their sense of smell would undergo a sensory overload. Freshly brewed coffee, mead, soups, bread straight out of the oven, and sizzling chicken being roasted in the kitchen. Oh, and how could one forget the dark yet soothing melody of tunes that bounced off the stone walls? However, the eerie part of its name came from the owners and the staff, since none of them were alive. The tavern was run by ghosts. Ordinary folk loved visiting the Eerie Ember, watching their food and drink serve themselves to every table. Ragnar and Death, however, were supernatural beings, therefore they could see the ghosts with ease. Pale waiters, waitresses, and chefs floating around doing their job and serving some of the, if not the tastiest meals ever made. Then a young, beautiful, pale-skinned waitress with long white hair wearing village clothes served the werewolf and the reaper. Ragnar had a cup of coffee his first time, and Death opted for his favorite, tea with no milk and 2 brown sugars. He then thanked Eloise as she moved on to the other tables. The Grum looked at the werewolf while stirring the sugar in his tea, then said, "Oh, mighty White Wolf, mind if I share some Algonquian folklore with you?" Ragnar sniffed the strong aroma of coffee as it stung his nose, then took a sip.
Once, just once, may I have a moment of silence? If you weren't Death himself, I swear I would have sewed your mouth shut a long time ago. Do you ever stop talking?
Hehe, no, but now this is serious, Ragnar. There's something known as the Wendigo, which first stemmed from the Wendigo with an eye. Now this was believed to be an evil entity of winter possessing starving and desperate people, since winter was the season with the most hardship, lack of resources, food shortages, etc. They said the possession would turn the victim into a cannibal. Now, stories like these were something I've heard through eons in my work. Humans making up stuff. However, when I was called to a village in the normal Earth timeline, then I realized the Wendigo could be real. There was a story about a man escorting his family through a snowstorm hundreds of years ago. The only food source was at a station point miles on end. With the winter being the most punishing that year, the man lost his son, leaving his body behind and pushing through with his wife and 2 other children.
That just sounds like winter. No supernatural connotation to it.
Not exactly. The man was overtaken by this troublesome rage and devoured his family. After the incident, he turned himself in, but the strange part was that they were right there by the next food pickup. His hunger got the best of him, as he said, which made him eat the remaining family members. When they asked him why, he said he felt like something was controlling him. When they set out on this journey, he kept seeing a dark entity's face with red eyes, trying to get into his mind. It seemed like when his son died, the man lost all control, and that's when the Wendigo got in. Then the concept or belief of a Wendigo had changed into something more physical. Many believed Wendigos were creatures hiding in caves and woodland areas, feeding on humans. Some stories mention the men possessed by the Wendigo entity had become actual Wendigos themselves. The more people they ate, the more of their human selves they had lost, thus turning into that monster. These creatures would eat to satiate their hunger, but that was a paradox, since the more they ate, the hungrier they became. However, despite them being starved with a decaying appearance, their strength was seen as something remarkable. They could break trees with a swipe of their arm and devour humans within seconds, leaving nothing more but teeth and hair behind.
Why are you telling me all of this?
I think Femon's horse is a demon Wendigo. Ragnar, now when I tell you that I have tried hunting this monster and failed, I am being serious. If it was a normal Wendigo, I could blink and poof, cease to exist, but this Wendigo, this one's different. When it comes to the riders of the apocalypse, Femon is the most intelligent. That's something that even I cannot deny. She created this demon into something that could manifest into whatever she wanted. Demons have unique powers, and when I was younger, my sister spent a lot of time using them as her lab rats. And so I suspect that she turned the demon Wendigo into her horse. That also explains why that wretched animal can travel through timelines without dying.
Does that mean that I am evil since I can travel through timelines as well?
Nope. I mean, yeah, you can travel between worlds, but that's because of my scythe. The first time that you traveled, you placed your hand onto my shoulder. You or I can go wherever my scythe goes. Now I know killing Conquest was easy, but Famine is a whole new level. Famine makes the most of winter. Sicknesses, ailments, hunger, plagues, that's right down her alley. I have no doubt my sister has become stronger over the years. I wonder what other diseases she has conjured up that could reduce my strength within seconds. But the most important thing is she doesn't have a specific timeline or city to hide in. Not like Conquest, War, or myself for that matter. Her swamp is hers and hers alone. No one knows where it is, and I mean no one. Except for that horse.
So we find the horse, we find Famine.
Exactly, but it's not that simple. Once the horse catches a whiff of me, it's gone like the wind. I fear the animal will do the same thing this time, but if me, you, or even the scythe can latch onto it before it disappears, we may have a chance to enter the swamp. However, if we are not united against Famine, one of us is certainly going to die. We have to find a way for both of us to make it to the swamp together.
The white wolf took the last sip of his coffee and grabbed a full roasted chicken basted with lemon and herb sauce. Then he walked out without saying a word to the Grim Reaper. Death scratched his head in confusion, then paid for their food and beverages with gold coins.
You could have told me you were leaving, you know.
The werewolf and the Reaper traveled through many different worlds and timelines, specifically in winter,
hoping to find a trace of Famine's Wendigo. They stopped at the village in which the horse was last seen and witnessed the blood soaking the wooden floor of the village house. The blood flowed into the snow like a red river. One more timeline remained. Death spun aside and took the White Wolf into a world that looked very similar to ours. The towns and villages were covered in snow, but the air seemed fouler. The Reaper spoke slowly and softly as his body tensed up.
It's here. I can feel it.
What was this pressure felt by the Grim Reaper? He nor Ragnar said a word. Only the sound of the whistling wind cutting through the winter air, while wood crackled somewhere in the middle of the village.
Something doesn't feel right. This feels like a trap.
Death's demeanor wasn't relaxed anymore. His jokes and snarky remarks were tucked away inside his hollow chest. The werewolf felt it too. There was no doubt the Wendigo was indeed in this village, but there was another presence nearby that felt far more terrifying than anything the White Wolf had faced thus far.
Let's keep moving,
Ragnar said, crouching low as possible, trying not to be detected. The Reaper walked through the village, opening doors and peeking through windows, seeing lifeless bodies on the wooden floor frozen in snow. One house, just like the previous village Famine attacked, had folk inside sharing food and warmth for as long as they possibly could. Ragnar's snout traveled up and to the side. His nostrils widened with each snuff before he told the Reaper, "I have it scent." Death, however, was lost in thought, the same way he felt when Conquest lurked nearby in Arkborn. He frowned and tightened his grip on the scythe, knowing deep down in his soul something terrible was going to happen. The dark Wendigo entity hid in the shadows with only its green, glowing, piercing eyes, watching the werewolf and the Reaper. Its long, slender fingers with razor-sharp nails scratched the bark of the tree as the creature gave an eerie smile. Usually it was fearful of death, but this time the Wendigo couldn't leave. Not without feeding. Master's orders. Within the blink of an eye, the Wendigo vanished and made its way towards the occupied house. The White Wolf extended his massive right arm to the side, obstructing the Grim Reaper's path. Ragnar sniffed again while his ears moved like antennas, trying to pick up signal.
I have a plan.
Would you like to share that with... Hey, what the hell are you doing?
Ragnar the White Wolf stood in front of the village home in plain sight. Death yelled at him in a whisper for him to get away, but the werewolf never moved. He used his toe and drew a semicircle in the snow. The village folk inside the home, scared and cold, saw the monstrous werewolf standing outside. They backed away in fear, unsure whether this monster would devour them. They saw his red eyes, sharp fangs, and giant titan size. Ragnar tapped his long nail against the window, then told them he wasn't there to hurt anyone.
Whatever happens, none of you must leave. Food and warmth will be given to you shortly.
Death was infuriated as he shouted,
So much for going unfucking noticed. After everything I told you in the tavern.
Maybe if you shut up for once, you would know what I am doing. The Wendigo will not leave this village, at least not empty-handed. Of all the villages in all the worlds we saw, it chose this one. Why? Because it has more people, more to feed on. It's hungry. I can hear its stomach growling. How would it go back to Famine empty-handed?
Death never said anything, but he pondered to himself. This is what made Ragnar the White Wolf so formidable. He wasn't this big oaf of a monster with brute force that would smash anything in sight. Rather, he was calm, calculated, and knew how to approach any fight, despite not knowing his opponent's skill set. The Reaper knew that it still wouldn't be easy, but if Ragnar put himself into the firing line, Death would be sure to have his back. Before his thoughts had come to an end, the White Wolf flew against the wooden house, smashing his back hard against the window. The cold wind gushed through, sending an icy chill to the villagers. The werewolf got up to his feet and held his hand out to them.
No, stay inside, it's okay.
He turned to the Reaper, then said,
Well, don't just stand there, did you see anything?
Death remained quiet. This was more difficult than the beast of Burdock Mountain. This time both werewolf and Reaper were fighting blind. The groom looked at the snow and saw tiny particles of green dust leaving a trail. The Wendigo hid behind one of the wooden houses, confused. Every fiber in the entity's body told it to leave, but it was so hungry. Then the Wendigo glanced at the broken window and smiled cunningly. It bolted towards the window, but it moved so quickly, the Wendigo seemed to be teleporting. Death looked at Ragnar and the werewolf gave a nod of agreement. They knew what was going to happen next. The white wolf did his signature move, anticipating an attack and grabbing the opponent without even looking at them. He held on to nothing at first, but the Wendigo's esophagus was being smashed by Ragnar's grip strength. The evil entity with its glowing green eyes hissed at the werewolf, slashing Ragnar's chest each time. The white wolf, however, never budged. Death quickly barged into the village home, spinning his scythe. He opened up a portal and told the people to go through. This would lead them to a village that had enough resources to survive the winter. Once they left and the portal closed, Ragnar threw the Wendigo through the window into the wooden house. Death grabbed the creature by its ankle and smashed it against every object that he could find. The Wendigo screeched and groaned in pain, being pummeled by the werewolf and the Reaper. They have worked together long enough to know how to coordinate their attacks. When one goes low, the other goes high. From a barrage of punches, elbows, kicks and knees, the Wendigo was unable to block a single attack from either of them. This creature became their punching bag, and with each hit, its existing decaying flesh was falling more rapidly than before. Finally, the Wendigo falls to its knees, defeated and unable to move. The Grim Reaper walked towards it and grabbed its jaw, looking deep into its green, glowing eyes. He said,
I knew you were a demon. My sister was smart enough to turn you into a Wendigo.
Death placed his right hand underneath the jaw of the Wendigo while his left hand was on the top of its head. Just before Ragnar could blink, the Reaper snapped its neck so hard its head was ripped off its body in the process. Ragnar kicked the head into the fireplace as both werewolf and Reaper watched the Wendigo's head and body burst into flames. Now, the next few moments happened within a few seconds, but the Reaper witnessed it in slow motion. He smirked at Ragnar, celebrating their victory.
Nice one, werewolf, if it wasn't for you.
No! Famine teleported inside the wooden house and punched a hole through Ragnar's stomach. She lifted the werewolf up with one arm, while blood poured out profusely. In pain and torment, the werewolf tried taking swipes at her with his razors for claws, but he couldn't land any on her. Death leaped towards both of them, summoning his scythe by reaching out his hand. The weapon moved like a magnet was pulling it, making its way to the Reaper's hand before he grabbed the handle tightly. He saw Famine giving him an eerie smile, showing her rotten teeth and decaying face. He threw the scythe with all his might, watching the weapon spin and move horizontally, hearing the steel blade slicing through the air, making its way to Famine's head. But he was too late. Famine had vanished into thin air, not only taking along the white wolf, but the Reaper's scythe with her. You or I can go wherever my scythe goes. Famine Swamp was indeed the foulest place, filled with plague, sicknesses, and diseases. The stench alone would be fatal, let alone the horrors of those lurking within. However, beneath a grassy, muddy patch carrying stagnant green water lay the scythe. The Reaper walked towards his weapon and picked it up. His demeanor was different. He was angrier than before. Now he was fear incarnate, a living nightmare, that would make every living being in every timeline tremble with absolute dread. The Grim took 3 minutes from the winter village to the swamp. Now in real time, that would serve as 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks, Death had been busy, for he stood in the dark and eerie swamp not alone. He pointed his scythe and watched 3 magical portals opening up. Those who walked out and stood behind Death ready for battle were not unfamiliar to you, my dear viewers and listeners, for the Grim Reaper had backup from the best people that he could find. Victor, the Grey Wolf of the Prophecy. Myra, the young and beautiful witch with dark magic flowing through her veins. And Fesliyan, the vampire cop, who now seemed to have embraced the monster within. Thus beginning the epic finale of The Werewolf and Reaper, Volume 1. Famine dragged the white wolf by his collar made of fur. As small and weak as she may have looked, it seemed like Ragnar weighed less than a mere twig on the ground. The werewolf's eyes opened and closed, dazed from the pain. He saw the skeleton army patrolling the far end of the swamp. Their green eyes glowed through the fog, but there was something different about them. The way they walked, moved, and carried out themselves, Ragnar knew immediately. These skeleton creatures, now starved and possessed by a supernatural force, were once fearsome warriors like himself. His eyes moved back to the nightmarish nature of the swamp. He struggled to breathe, not solely because of the opened wound in his stomach, but also the plague fog and smoke engulfing the place. Famine, however, seemed to breathe just fine. After all, she was immune to every disease and virus that existed. She then took Ragnar down a long stairway. The white wolf had now been unconscious, therefore never felt his head getting smashed against the stone steps. Famine picked up the giant werewolf with one arm, then tossed him onto a wooden table. Her dungeon was filled with jars, tubes, pipes, and toxic waste, mixed with chemicals in cabinets. She also had laboratory equipment neatly packed, the same way that a chemistry student would. Famine used her razor-sharp nails and made slits onto Ragnar's arm, right between the forearm and bicep. She stuck long tubes into the werewolf's arms, siphoning out blood into vials. One vial, however, seemed larger than the rest, and as the blood slowly dropped to the bottom, she heard footsteps echoing through her dungeon. But these weren't ordinary footsteps, rather monstrous and thunderous, filled with malice and power, shaking the dungeon's foundation and crumbling the stone walls. The sound of metal clanging on impact and a weapon scratching the surface. She felt this ominous presence approaching, which made her back up further from the stairway. These footsteps belonged to the first and oldest rider of the apocalypse, her brother, War. He was a giant, so large that he dwarfed the great and mighty Ragnar Liefsson, 15 feet tall and 850 pounds. War was the second most feared in hell. He has conquered many armies in more worlds that have been documented. He is a force like no other. He stood strong and tall with his black cloak moving against the draft inside the dungeon. His body covered in metal with a large warhammer attached to his back, concealed by the cloak. His facial features were also hidden by a long and pointy metal mask. However, his glowing red eyes shining through could not be hidden, no matter how much they tried. Famine hid her fear well at first, standing confident and strong herself, though discreetly. She began peeling the skin around her fingernails in anxiousness, and then she found the courage to speak.
Well, bad. Just because I told you about my swamp does not mean you can show up when you want to.
War moved slowly and confidently like there was no other being, human or supernatural, worthy of his time. He grabbed 2 wooden chairs and sat on them, looking at his sister. She heard him breathing through the metal mask. She felt his red eyes touching the darkest and most vulnerable parts of what little soul she had left. Then he spoke.
Pharaoh, you've done well, little one. Perhaps I should refrain from doubting you. How did you get it done?
Famine exhaled deeply in relief and replied,
It wasn't easy. I lured them in. I starved my Wendigo to such an extent it could not return home until it fed. Ragnar and Dad took the bait. Of course they would defeat my demon with ease. However, it also gave me an opening to catch the white wolf. Ragnar Liefsson would become my weapon of mass destruction. Do you know how many diseases he could spread? He is the best carrier I could ever have hoped for.
She then pointed to the vial filling up with his blood.
And this vial is what you requested. Part of our agreement, yes?
His scythe. Where is his scythe?
The scythe? Who cares about his stupid weapon? He can't kill us anyway. Only Ragnar can.
War gradually stood up and walked towards his sister. His breathing was heavier and his aura could crush the stone walls in a heartbeat. He was face to face with Famine when he said,
You foolish child, you dare question me? That scythe is the key to our brother's mission. You were so fixated on catching the werewolf that you ignored the most dangerous weapon in all of existence.
Famine moved closer to War, not cowering away this time.
And you need to watch your tone, brother. I have sacrificed my horse for this mission. You're in my swamp, my dungeon, with my werewolf.
As War was about to strike her with the back of his hand covered in metal gloves, he stopped midway and turned his head to the side towards the stairway. Famine did so as well. They said it at the same time.
He's here.
Famine snapped her head back in a creepy, possessed manner. Her glowing green eyes had turned pale while looking at the ceiling. Her hands rose to the side with her fingers tightened like claws. Her skeleton army in the swamp had stopped dead in their tracks. They were puppets being controlled by supernatural strings pulled by Famine. They march in thousands like their master's life depends on it. Famine rushed up the stairway, turning back only to see War sitting back on both chairs. He moved closer to the vial, admiring the blood slowly filling up. War had no intention of leaving the dungeon. He never cared about Famine. All he wanted was this vial of blood. He said,
This is your mess, Famine. Your carelessness. If you fail me again, I will feed you to Monolith.
Ah yes, Monolith, the dragon of all dragons, and not only War's beloved pet, but his loyal servant as well. Angels and demons had feared this beast, more so than they feared Mondrog the Hellhound. The more it ate, the more it grew, and that should be sufficient to describe on how ant-like a demon like Zalzar was, standing in front of this monstrosity. Zargon, the demon king commanding Zalzar, would be the only being surpassing Monolith in size. Why did Famine's eyes flicker? Was it fear of her brother? Was the name Monolith responsible for her tremble? No. Famine could hold her own against the strongest of supernatural beings, but why did she anticipate this feeling of doom? Why did she feel like of all the eons she had lived through, today she was going to die? Death never spoke. It was only a matter of time before they caught sight of the skeleton army. He stood in the swamp with the front portion of his cloak opened. He had a much larger body with pale skin and elongated muscle. This version of the Reaper, as frightening as can be, was the way that people had imagined him. No one spoke. The witch, vampire, and werewolf trio had their own problems to deal with in their own world. The elf lord Eleanor and the dwarven warrior Berthold would have been summoned by death, but the witch told the Reaper they were doing well, though they were caught up in something. How strange. What could be so important they would turn down the opportunity to save their best friend, Ragnar Liefsson? This was a lie told by Myra, since she, Monrog, and Lancelot have been searching for the elf and dwarf for the past 7 days. No one knows who or what has taken them. Fesliyan was now a menacing vampire. His warm nature, kind mannerisms, and charismatic smile was hidden from the world. His hair was unkept rather than slicked back and proper. He only accepted this request from Death after the Reaper told him time would stand still in their own respective timeline. Fesliyan Hunt would have to return immediately, since the hybrids had been set loose onto the city of Redwater, while his beloved Redwater police station had put a bounty on the vampire's head. Meanwhile, Victor the Grey Wolf had been traveling far and wide on his journey. He could have played the waiting game for the 5 monsters of the werewolf trials, but time was of the essence. The longer the trials took, the more time the demons would have to send their army. However, he heard murmurs from villages and towns about a beanstalk high up in the mountain. Rumors of a man living with giants that slaughtered his own kind. That was his barrier to cross in order to reach Hilno, the insectoid creature made of stone. So why did they choose to help the Reaper? They knew that if Ragnar Liefsson died, then everything they are setting out to do would be in vain. Victor Humbridge may be the werewolf of the prophecy, but Ragnar the White Wolf was always the anchor. Then Taker, Death's apprentice, and Avery, the bookstore demon, had apparated into the swamp. They were holding hands but parted them the moment they saw the Reaper. Taker bowed in respect to the trio while Avery introduced themselves. Taker then looked at Death and asked, "What's the plan, sir?" There was an awkward silence that filled the air. The groom then spoke with seriousness and authority. "You and Avery will get Ragnar out of that building at the end of the swamp. The werewolf, vampire, and witch will fight off against Famine's skeleton army." Myra then asked,
What about you? What will you do?
"There's more than one power surging through that building. Famine isn't alone, and I suspect War has joined forces with her. No one engaged in battle with them, do I make myself clear? I will take them both on." Victor and Fesliyan had asked the same question at the same time. What skeleton army? Death pointed in the distance. "That skeleton army." Famine's army marches towards them, their weapons gradually appearing out of thin air covered in poison and tailored to the allies' weaknesses. Thousands of undead warriors hasten their pace, running with silver swords and spears for the werewolf, wooden stakes and arrows for the vampire, and flaming torches to burn the witch alive. The werewolf, witch, and vampire stood united with Myra in the middle. Her eyes lit up purple while Victor's changed from blue to red. Fesliyan's fangs pushed out while his nails grew long and sharp. And so they charged towards the skeleton army, fighting with all their might, hoping the Grim Reaper can save the White Wolf. Death vanished into a wisp of dark smoke and broke through the dungeon window. Famine was startled, but War never budged. He was relaxed, calm, and calculated as if death was no threat to him. Death looked at Ragnar laying on the table unconscious, becoming an experiment of Famine's. He glanced at War and tightened the grip on his scythe. Famine charged at the Reaper, but Death swung his scythe and struck her so hard she broke the dungeon wall with the impact rolling in the swamp, trying to slow down. The Reaper then removed daggers from his cloak, then tossed them at War in succession. War raised his finger and the daggers stopped in mid-air, unable to touch him. The groom knew War would do that. He wasn't trying to hurt him, not at that moment at least. That was a mere distraction. Death teleported outside the swamp and ran towards Famine, whereas Taker and Avery apparated into the dungeon directly next to Ragnar Liefsson. Taker grabbed the werewolf while Avery jumped on War's back, tightening the grip on the chokehold that she had on him. Miss Avery was indeed strong, far stronger than any usual demon, but War treated this incident like a human trying to shake off an insect. Taker yelled at Avery to let go, but the demon felt that she could bring War down. She yelled at Taker to get Ragnar out of there while she held back War. He hesitated. He was scared. Taker teleported with the white wolf and kept him next to a tree trunk in the swamp, then teleported back into the dungeon. However, War had broken the hold Avery had on him. His giant hand held her by the throat while she struggled, scratching and kicking his metal mask. War looked at Taker and said,
Is this who my brother sends to take me on? His apprentice and a pathetic, worthless demon.
He used his other hand and grabbed Avery's ankles while keeping the grip on her throat. War then yanked Avery's neck and legs from either end, ripping the demon in half. Taker was numb. He wanted to scream, he wanted to yell and shout, but no voice left his throat. His eyes widened with anger, but mostly fear at the power that War carried around. He loved Avery, but such was a life of being an apprentice. He knew how catastrophic it would be disobeying orders. No time to mourn, no time to grieve, and no time to seek revenge. He teleported outside the dungeon and placed his hands onto the white wolf's chest. With tears rolling down his face, Taker began healing the werewolf rapidly. Victor, Myra, and Fesliyan fought bravely, cutting down the skeleton army. With massive swipes and bites from the werewolf, with cursed magic from the witch tearing them apart, with the vampire's nails so sharp it cut through bone, Famine's army was destroyed. The trio, however, never did come out unscathed. They obtained wounds that would take ages to heal. But now wasn't the time to rest. They saw War, the giant personification of doom, heading towards Taker and Ragnar. Death and Famine had engaged in a fight of epic proportions. They both had a skill set mastered and tailored to their own strengths. Death was more of a counter-striker, waiting for his opponent to make a move and then capitalizing on it, whereas Famine was more of a sneaky grappler. Her small size helped her maneuver around the opponent, then get a hold of them and toss them like pillows. The fight was evenly matched. The Reaper knew his sister was strong, so this was no surprise to him. The troublesome change of the tide, however, came from the fact that Famine got stronger as the fight progressed, whereas Death got weaker. Famine was drawing strength from her swamp. Her punches were starting to feel like sonic waves with the impact behind them. Taker continued healing Ragnar, but he could feel War behind him. Victor the Grey Wolf ran towards both of them, grabbing War in a bear hug from the back, lifting him up in the air. War was surprised on how strong Victor was, but that moment lasted for a short while. War elbowed him in the face, sending the Grey Wolf tumbling. Fesliyan tried his luck with a barrage of slices and swipes. He was quick, so quick that his hands looked like blurs. But War dodged every one of those attacks with only his black cloak taking the brunt of it. He grabbed the vampire and headbutted him, sending Fesliyan flying against a tree. Myra then cast dark magic against the rider while summoning Nala, the large serpent. War grabbed the snake by its head and tossed it aside like it was nothing. This time the witch could not divide her magic. The snake then vanished while Myra focused her spells on War. Her purple supernatural force mixed with dark smoke had picked the giant up 4 inches above the ground. War had a momentary lapse of panic, but Myra's power faded. Perhaps if she embraced the darkness, her nose wouldn't have bled and her power would not have wavered. War laughed, somewhat impressed by the trio's effort. He cracked his knuckles and rubbed the crick in his neck, then stretched and said,
My turn.
He dashed towards Fesliyan faster than the vampire ever was, then punched a hole through Fesliyan's chest, killing him instantly. War vanished and appeared behind the grey werewolf and snapped Victor's neck. He then walked towards Myra, witnessing how depleted of energy she was. The witch was on her knees trying to get up, but War stepped on her head, smashing it into a pulp. However, When he turned around towards Taker, the white wolf was no longer on the ground. Ragnar stood behind War, angrier as ever, with his blood-red eyes shining brighter than the giant's. He channeled all his power into his fist and landed a solid right cross to War's face, denting the iron mask and dropping the giant to one knee. Taker saw this chance to freeze War with his own dark magic. He knew he couldn't hold War for long, but a few minutes were all they needed. Death shouted from his end while fighting Famine, "Ragnar, do you trust me?" The white wolf picked his head up, found Death, and said yes. The Reaper told the werewolf to raise his hand out and think of the happiest memory that he stored away. One specific memory that would numb the pain. Ragnar thought about Luna. He thought about how much she loved him, how much she cared and helped him. He thought about the day their beautiful son Maximus was born. The day when the mighty Ragnar Liefsson, a fearsome warrior knight, had tears of happiness rolling down his face. He then reached his hand out, and so did the Reaper. Famine ran towards Death, trying to stop him. She knew what he was going to do, but it was too late. The werewolf and Reaper floated towards each other like a supernatural force was pulling them. Their hands were drawn together like magnets. And as Taker's hold on War had diminished and Famine trying to stop the werewolf and Reaper, the swamp had been overtaken by darkness. The sky turned dark with the sound of rumbling thunder echoing through. Lightning struck the ground in succession and Famine was caught in it. White and black smoke mixed together, blending with each other, and nothing more could be seen. With his massive forearm, War hit Taker so hard the apprentice broke through the trees in the swamp. Then just as he was about to kill Taker, the giant rider of the apocalypse was stopped dead in his tracks. He felt an object hit the back of his shoulder. It rolled on the ground after impact and War's eyes had widened. This object was Famine's head. Then at that moment, War witnessed the werewolf and the Reaper walking towards him, but they were one. Slow and steady in the pouring rain, a beast awakens. A tall, muscular, light gray figure with glowing red eyes emerges from the darkness. His black hooded cloak gets drenched in the swamp water with every monstrous stride that he took. Ragnar and Death's unique features were molded into one. This was the Grum Werewolf, a being that had a power that War never felt in his entire life. The Grum Werewolf looked at the trio on the ground, lifeless. He gently moved his hands like moving invisible water flowing in the air. Suddenly the witch draws breath. The grey wolf's neck turns back into its normal position, giving him life. Fesliyan's heart, as well as the hole in his chest, repaired itself, making the vampire breathe again. The Grum Werewolf used his hand and struck the air quick and hard, cutting a line through space and time itself. He looked at Taker, then back at the trio. Finally, he speaks. His words had both the voices of Death and Ragnar channeling through. "We owe you our lives. When you need us, you will know what to do. For now, the four of you leave this place at once." And so Myra, Victor, Fesliyan, and Taker, now breathing life again, stumbled and jumped through the portal opened by the Grum Werewolf. Their sacrifice, their fight, and their spirit will never be forgotten. War picked up the head of Famine and threw it over his shoulder. He removed the large warhammer from his wide back and carried it with one arm. The weapon seemed to be slightly smaller than him, yet how the hell was he carrying it so effortlessly? He swung his hammer diagonally and a supernatural barrier separated him from the Grum Werewolf. Nothing could ever pass through this barrier. No human, no werewolf, no reaper, and certainly no magic. The Grum Werewolf punched and kicked the invisible barrier repeatedly. Small cracks began appearing that created an opening. War showed the Grum Werewolf the vial of blood in his possession, then teleported out of the swamp, never to be seen again. The swamp had been crumbling into a million pieces. Without Famine, this place would cease to exist. The Grum Werewolf held his hand out and the scythe flew into it. He spun it and opened up a portal, barely making it out just before the swamp finally destroyed itself. During the teleportation process, Ragnar and Death had separated from the grim werewolf. They ended up in Ragnar's world in the village of the Harrow. Their bodies felt like the insides were being ripped apart. A few hours later, the full moon lit up the sky and Ragnar took a moment to admire its beauty. They then made their way into Ragnar's village home on the mountaintop, next to the graves of Luna and Maximus.
Why didn't we chase after War? We could have taken him.
Maybe not, but I did something really bad, Ragnar.
What are you talking about?
The witch, werewolf, and vampire weren't supposed to die in that swamp. I wasn't supposed to bring them back to life either. I know by doing so, I created yet another rift in the timeline. Miss Avery's death is something I will grieve over for a very long time, but she was a demon. No one can bring demons back. If we chased after War, I don't know what would have happened to us. You saw what famine did to you. You saw how long it took me to best her in battle. War is on a different league on his own. By no means we can face him without a plan. He has 5 war chiefs and the biggest dragon I have ever seen. His world is entirely different.
You're scared.
Scared? We could have parted ways during the fight against him, then both of us would have died. This is the first time that we became one. We don't know what we're capable of, we don't know how long the possession lasts for, what weaknesses we have, what strengths we have. It's too risky.
Then at that moment, someone knocked on Ragnar's door. 3 slow knocks from what sounded like a very heavy hand. Death and Ragnar looked at each other in confusion. The White Wolf never gets visitors. The village of Harrow was empty. The Reaper told the werewolf to stay back while he opened the door, ready to attack, but stopped immediately. Death backed up from the door in disbelief. "No, it cannot be," he said. And so, The Werewolf and the Reaper Volume 1 finally comes to an end, as Belru Caesar, the first werewolf that has ever been created, stands outside Ragnar's home.